Hey guys, tonight we're going to step outside of history itself, into a time so deep that the story of humanity as you know it hasn't even begun. Imagine, we are standing on a coastline that no longer exists. Before you lies a vast green plain teeming with life, where today there is only the deep, crushing blackness of the open ocean. The air is colder, cleaner, and filled with the calls of creatures long extinct. In the distance, you see figures moving around a gentle, flickering light. You see one of them look up at the same moon you see, the same distant stars, and you realize with a sudden chill that the brain inside that person's skull is identical to yours. It has the same capacity for love, for wonder, for genius. Yet their entire world, their history, their knowledge, everything they ever built or dreamed, is utterly and completely lost to us. Tonight, we journey back 100,000 years to witness the rise of a civilization unlike any we can conceive, and we will watch it vanish so completely that it leaves not even a ghost behind. Are we the first intelligent civilization to walk this planet? Is our history a straight, triumphant line? Or is it just one peak in a repeating cycle of rise and fall? And what would it mean if our entire society, with all its art and science, is just a footnote in a much longer, forgotten story? Thanks to the clues hidden deep within the Earth's geology, our own genetics, and a bit of speculative science, tonight we will become deep time detectives, searching for the phantom fingerprints of a world that was. Frankly, if you were actually dropped there, your biggest worry wouldn't be the philosophy of it all, but the giant, short-faced bear that thinks you look like an easy lunch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm. That long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. It always fascinates me to see where you're all tuning in from. Let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open a history book, and the story always starts in the same place. Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley. You see the first cities rising from the dust around 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. It feels like a solid, dependable starting line. But this is the core illusion of our past. Our entire recorded history, from the first cuneiform tablet to the tweet you just read, is a tiny, paper-thin sliver of time. Anatomically modern humans, people who were for all intents and purposes us, have been walking this earth for at least 300,000 years. This means that for 98% of our existence, we have no written story. We have what we assume was a long, slow climb through the Stone Age. But this assumption is based on an absence of evidence, and that's a very different thing from evidence of absence. We look for lost cities from the Roman era or forgotten temples in the jungle from a few thousand years ago. But what if we're missing something far bigger? Not just a forgotten empire, but an entire epoch of advancement. A whole chapter of the human story that was written, read, and then completely erased before the first page of our current history was even conceived. This is the grand question we rarely think to ask. Imagine a geological curtain that falls around, say, 20,000 years ago. Beyond that point, the forces of time become so overwhelming that almost no direct evidence of a complex society, as we would imagine it, could possibly survive. Anything built on the surface would be scoured, buried, crushed or even melted back into the planet itself. The oldest piece of large-scale, monumental architecture we've ever found is Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. It's a breathtaking collection of massive, carved stone pillars built by hunter-gatherers, and it completely upended our understanding of the past. It dates to about 11,600 years ago. That's our current heavyweight champion for ancient structures. But 100,000 years ago is nearly 10 times older than that. The scientific tools we use to date the more recent past begin to fail us at this depth. Carbon-14 dating, the famous method for dating organic materials, is only reliable up to about 50,000 years. Beyond that, the radioactive carbon has decayed so much that it's virtually undetectable. It's like trying to see a flickering candle from miles away. Eventually, the light just doesn't reach you. We're left staring into a profound darkness, armed only with less precise methods and the few durable artifacts that managed to survive the long night. Even within our very short, well-documented historical period, we see how easily advanced knowledge can vanish. Tucked away in a museum in Athens is the Antikythera mechanism, a mind-bogglingly complex device recovered from a 2,000-year-old Roman shipwreck. It's an analog computer of intricate bronze gears that was used to predict astronomical positions and eclipses. Its sophistication was so far beyond anything else we knew from that period that for decades no one could believe it was real. Nothing even approaching its complexity would appear again for over 1,000 years. It's a perfect miniature example of our big question, a piece of high technology that was created, used, lost, and completely forgotten. If that can happen in the relatively recent past, what could be lost across a chasm of 100,000 years? This brings us to a fundamental point of contention, because historians and archaeologists still argue whether the transition to agriculture around 10,000 years ago was a net benefit for human health or a step backward. If we can't even agree on the nature of the most foundational event in our known history, imagine what we don't know about the 290,000 years that came before it. To even begin searching for this lost civilization, you can't picture them in our world. You have to step into theirs. The Earth of 100,000 years ago would feel, at first glance, both familiar and profoundly alien. The continents are roughly where you expect them to be, but the coastlines are all wrong. You're standing in the middle of the Pleistocene epoch, a period we casually call the last ice age. This doesn't mean the entire planet is a frozen snowball. The tropics are still warm, and vast grasslands stretch across the temperate zones. But so much of the world's water is locked up in colossal ice sheets covering much of North America and Northern Europe that the oceans are dramatically smaller. Sea levels are as much as 120 meters. That's nearly 400 feet, lower than they are today. This isn't just a trivial change, it redraws the entire map of the habitable world. The island nations of Southeast Asia are gone, replaced by a single massive landmass called Sundaland. Australia and New Guinea are joined together into a continent known as Sahul. And the English Channel, that famous body of water that has thwarted invasions for centuries, simply doesn't exist. Great Britain is just a rugged northwestern peninsula of mainland Europe, connected by a sweep of lowlands and river valleys that we now call Doggerland. For any society living at the time, these vast exposed coastal plains would have been the most desirable real estate on the planet. Fertile, rich in resources, and teeming with life. And today, all of it is deep underwater, hidden from our sight. You are not alone in this world. Far from it. This is a key historical fact that often gets lost in the caveman narrative. Anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, are already well established and have been for 200,000 years. They have migrated out of Africa in several waves and are spread across much of the Old World, sharing the landscape with their evolutionary cousins, the Neanderthals in Europe and the Denisovans in Asia. And what a landscape it is! The ecosystem is populated by a cast of creatures that seem torn from a fantasy novel. The megafauna. You would see herds of immense woolly mammoths, their tusks curving in magnificent arcs. You might catch a glimpse of a saber-toothed cat, its canine teeth like twin daggers, stalking its prey. Giant ground sloths, bigger than modern grizzly bears, would be placidly stripping leaves from trees. This isn't a sideshow. These powerful creatures were the environment your ancestors had to navigate, survive, and compete with every single day. This ancient world was not static. It was racked by violent climate swings. We know this because of the incredible scientific evidence provided by ice cores drilled in Antarctica and Greenland. These cores are like frozen time capsules. Each layer of ice represents a year's snowfall, and trapped within that ice are tiny bubbles of the ancient atmosphere. By analyzing them, scientists can reconstruct a year-by-year record of global temperatures, carbon dioxide levels, and even major volcanic eruptions stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. This data shows that the climate didn't just slowly cool and warm. It could flip dramatically, sometimes in the span of a single human lifetime, presenting an existential challenge to any society, no matter how advanced. Even in this harsh world, people found time for more than just survival. They found time for art and for identity. In various archaeological sites from this period, we've found significant quantities of manganese dioxide, a dark black mineral. While it has some minor practical uses, the prevailing theory is that these early humans were grinding it into a powder to use as a stark, dramatic body paint. It's a quirky tidbit, but a profound one. It's evidence of symbolic thought, of a desire to create an identity, to distinguish us from them, or perhaps to perform sacred rituals. It's the beginning of culture. This deep history is full of unresolved mysteries that keep scientists awake at night. For instance, much later, around 12,900 years ago, the warming trend at the end of the Ice Age suddenly and shockingly reversed. For over 1,000 years, the world plunged back into near-glacial conditions in an event called the Younger Dryas. To this day, paleoclimatologists still argue whether the Younger Dryas was caused by the impact of a fragmented comet over North America or by a massive pulse of fresh water from melting glaciers that shut down the Atlantic Ocean's heat-conveying currents. The debate rages because the answer has huge implications for understanding how fragile our own climate system is. It's in this volatile, dynamic, and dangerous world that our hypothetical advanced society must have found a way to rise. Now you have to consciously erase the image that just popped into your head. The brutish, club-wielding, grunting caveman is a cartoon, a relic of 19th century prejudice that has been incredibly hard to shake. The people watching the stars 100,000 years ago were you. Their brains, the physical 3-pound organs of wrinkled fatty tissue inside their skulls, were anatomically identical to yours. They had the same frontal lobe for planning and personality, the same temporal lobe for memory and language, the same parietal lobe for spatial awareness. They had the full biological hardware for abstract thought, for intricate social mapping, for long-term planning, and for telling elaborate stories. They were not just surviving, they were thinking, feeling, and creating. We know this isn't just a romantic guess because of the clues they left behind in the few places where time was gentle. In a place called Blombos Cave, on the coast of modern-day South Africa, archaeologists have found definitive proof. Here, buried in layers of sand and ash, dated to between 75,000 and 100,000 years ago, they discovered the world's oldest art studio. This is a mainstream historical fact, and it's a profound one. They found pieces of ochre, a soft, iron-rich stone, that had been deliberately engraved with cross-hatched geometric patterns. This isn't a doodle, it's a design. It's a symbol. It's information being stored in an abstract form. In the same cave, they found dozens of tiny seashells, each one carefully perforated in the exact same way, clearly strung together to be worn as beads. This is personal adornment, a statement of identity. It's the prehistoric equivalent of a wedding ring, a uniform, or a fashion statement. It says, "I belong to a group," or "I have a certain status," or simply, "I am me." These aren't the actions of a primitive mind focused only on the next meal. These are the actions of a modern, symbolic human. So why do we picture them as simple? Because our entire view of their world is skewed by a massive survival bias. Imagine if a future archaeologist, 1,000,000 years from now, tried to understand our civilization, but the only things that survived were the steel frames of our skyscrapers and our ceramic toilets. They would conclude that we were a society of metallic skeletons who worshipped porcelain gods. They would miss our art, our music, our literature, our philosophy, everything that was made of paper, plastic, wood, or digital code. The same is true for the deep past. We find their stone tools because stone lasts. We don't find the intricate wooden carvings, the woven baskets made from reeds, the clothing stitched from plant fibers, the complex oral histories that were their libraries, or the star charts they drew in the sand. We are judging an entire civilization by its most durable garbage. The capacity for a rich, complex culture is directly tied to language. And for a long time, we assumed our ancestors lacked it, at least in its modern form. But we now have incredible scientific evidence to the contrary. Your ability to speak and understand complex sentences is linked to a specific gene called FOXP2. It's not the language gene in a simple sense, but it's absolutely crucial for the fine motor control of the larynx and mouth that allows for sophisticated speech. Geneticists have been able to extract and sequence ancient DNA, and they discovered that the modern, human version of the FOXP2 gene was already present in our ancestors 100,000 years ago. Even more startling, they found it in the Neanderthals too. This means the world of the late Pleistocene was a talkative one. People were not just grunting. They were gossiping, debating, teaching their children, and telling stories under the stars. This intelligence expressed itself in surprising ways. It's a fascinating and quirky tidbit that Neanderthals, our supposedly less clever cousins, were the world's first chemists. They developed a powerful adhesive, a kind of superglue made from birch bark tar. This wasn't an accidental discovery. The process requires heating the bark in an oxygen-free environment to a precise temperature, between 340 and 400 degrees Celsius. Too cold and the tar doesn't form. Too hot and it burns away. They were building sealed containers, likely from clay or rolled bark, to perform a complex chemical process called dry distillation. This is a multi-stage, abstract project. It requires planning, precision, and a deep understanding of materials, that goes far beyond just hitting one rock with another. They used this glue to attach stone points to their wooden spears, creating deadly, efficient hunting weapons. And it's this very topic that leads to one of the most active scholarly debates in the field. Anthropologists still argue whether Neanderthals had language with the same complexity and recursive syntax as Homo sapiens. We know they had the genetic hardware for speech, but did they develop the software, the ability to embed clauses within clauses, to ask hypothetical questions, to speak of the distant past and the imagined future? The answer is a mystery, but it reminds us that there were likely multiple flavors of intelligence on that ancient Earth, not just our own. These were people with the full potential for greatness, living in a world we can only glimpse through a keyhole. So, if these brilliant modern minds existed in that ancient world, where is their stuff? Where are the ruins of their cities, the fragments of their machines, the foundations of their monuments? To answer that, you have to appreciate that the planet Earth is not a patient archivist. It's a relentless recycling machine, and over a span of 100,000 years, its primary job is to erase everything. You have to understand the sheer, uncompromising violence of deep time. Let's start with the most obvious force: erosion. It's the slow, steady sandpaper of wind and water. You see a mountain and think it's a symbol of permanence, but wind and rain are grinding it down, grain by grain, turning it into the sand on a distant beach. A river carving a canyon is washing away millions of tons of rock a year. Now think about a skyscraper. If we all vanished tomorrow, it would be a pile of rusted rebar and concrete dust in less than 1,000 years. Over 100,000 years, the forces of erosion wouldn't just topple it, they would scatter its very atoms. Next comes decay, the quiet chemistry of disintegration. Iron aches to become rust, its most stable state. Wood longs to become soil. Even our supposedly immortal plastics, when exposed to sunlight and temperature swings, will break down into brittle fragments and eventually into invisible microparticles, a toxic dust scattered in the sediment. But the most profound force of erasure is the ground beneath your feet. The Earth's crust is not a single, solid shell. It's a mosaic of massive tectonic plates that are constantly shifting, grinding against each other, and sliding around on the planet's molten mantle. In a process called subduction, one plate can be forced underneath another, dragging the continent it carries down into the Earth's interior to be melted back into magma. This is the planet's ultimate recycling program. Any city, any structure, any trace of a civilization built on that doomed piece of crust would be completely and irrevocably destroyed, its materials eventually spewed back out of a volcano 1,000,000 years later. We have a perfect mainstream historical fact that illustrates this on a smaller scale. Think about the ruins of ancient Rome. We can still walk through the Forum today because the city was, for the most part, continuously occupied. When buildings fell, new ones were built on top, burying and protecting the older layers. Even after its decline, the dry Mediterranean climate was relatively kind. Now contrast that with the Mayan cities of Central America. Places like Tikal were once sprawling metropolises of stone pyramids and plazas. But once they were abandoned around 900 AD, the relentless humid jungle moved in. Tree roots tore through stone, acidic soil dissolved plaster, and in just over 1,000 years, these once great cities were almost completely swallowed, hidden under a green blanket of vegetation. That's what a wet climate can do in a mere millennium. Now multiply that power by 100. For any civilization that existed in the northern latitudes, there was an even more destructive force. As scientific evidence, geologists can drill cores from the land and see clear evidence of the last ice age. What they often find is that the topsoil, the rich, organic layer where you would farm, build, and live, is simply gone. It has been scraped away down to the bare bedrock by the advancing glaciers. Imagine a sheet of ice, 2 miles thick, acting like a planetary-scale bulldozer, grinding everything in its path into a slurry of rock and dust and pushing it out to sea. Any trace of a settlement in its path would have been obliterated. This is why claims of out-of-place artifacts often fall apart under scrutiny. It's a quirky tidbit, but in the 1930s, a family in London, Texas, found a hammer that appeared to be embedded in a 400-million-year-old rock. The London hammer, as it's known, became a famous piece of evidence for antediluvian civilizations. However, geologists have shown that the rock is not ancient stone, but a concretion, a mass of minerals that can form relatively quickly around a metallic object. In this case, a 19th-century miner's hammer that was likely dropped in a crevice. Time and chemistry created a puzzle that looked like an impossibility. And this highlights the ultimate problem. The rock record itself is hard to read. Geologists still argue whether certain anomalous sediment layers in the geologic record are evidence of prehistoric asteroid impacts or massive volcanic eruptions. If we can't even be sure what caused these giant, planet-scarring events, how could we possibly hope to find the subtle trace of a long-vanished city buried within them? We have to look for a different kind of clue. So if we can't find their buildings and we can't find their tools, how could we ever hope to find them? This is where the search takes a fascinating turn, away from archaeology and into the realm of planetary science. And you should know, this isn't just a late-night fantasy. It's a question that serious scientists have actually considered. In 2018, 2 researchers, a climate scientist from NASA and Adam Frank, an astrophysicist, published a paper on this very topic. They called their thought experiment the Silurian hypothesis, a playful nod to a classic Doctor Who episode featuring an ancient, intelligent reptilian species. But their question was deeply serious. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth millions of years before us, how could we detect it today? Their conclusion was a complete paradigm shift. You stop looking for the needle and start looking for the damage the needle did to the haystack. You stop looking for artifacts and start looking for the planetary fingerprint. Any industrial civilization, they argued, would inevitably alter the planet's systems in ways that leave behind a long-lasting geochemical scar. So, let's turn the camera around. Forget the deep past for a moment and look at ourselves. Imagine our own global civilization vanishes tomorrow. All our cities, our art, our books, all of it is left to the mercy of time. Fast forward 50 million years. A future geologist from some other species drills a core sample. What would they find? They wouldn't find a single screw or shard of glass from our world, but they would immediately see a very, very strange layer in the rock. First, they'd notice a sudden massive spike in carbon isotopes. The fossil fuels we burn are made from ancient plant life, which preferentially uses the lighter isotope, carbon-12. By burning trillions of tons of it, we are flooding the atmosphere with this lighter carbon, changing the planet's natural ratio in a way that will be visible in the rock record for millions of years. Alongside that carbon spike, they'd find a thin, bizarre layer of plastic sediment, the pulverized remains of our countless bags, bottles, and gadgets, now fossilized into a toxic stratum. they would detect a sudden surge in nitrogen isotopes, a clear sign of the artificial fertilizers we use to feed our billions. They might even find traces of unusual synthetic molecules that nature would never create on its own, things like PCBs, or even the faint chemical echo of our steroids and pharmaceuticals flushed into the world's water systems. And then they'd find the smoking gun. They would find radioactive isotopes that shouldn't be there, like plutonium-244. A product of our nuclear reactors and weapons, plutonium-244 has a half-life of 80 million years. Finding even a handful of its atoms in a sediment layer would be an unmistakable screaming sign that someone, at some point, was deliberately splitting the atom. This is the core idea of the Silurian hypothesis. A civilization's true, lasting legacy isn't its monuments, but its pollution. This idea is so powerful because we have a mainstream historical fact to back it up in the present day. Geologists are now actively debating whether we have left the Holocene epoch and entered a new one called the Anthropocene. The name literally means the human epoch, and its proposed starting point is the mid-20th century, precisely because this is when our industrial and nuclear activity began to leave that unmistakable global fingerprint in the geological record. We are creating a Silurian-style signature right now. As powerful scientific evidence, geologists can look back in time and see natural events that provide a model for what this might look like. About 56 million years ago, the Earth experienced a massive global warming event called the Paleocene-Eocene Thermal Maximum, or PETM. For a few 100,000 years, global temperatures soared, and when scientists analyze the rock layers from that time, they find a huge spike in those same lighter carbon isotopes, a signature eerily similar to the one we're creating today. This event is a crucial analog for our climate change models. It's a case study for what happens when you inject a colossal amount of carbon into the atmosphere. One quirky tidbit about our own potential legacy is that one of the longest-lasting markers of our existence might be the dramatically altered courses of rivers due to our massive dams, like the Hoover Dam or the Three Gorges. The structures themselves would vanish, but their effect on the landscape, the canyons they carved, and the vast deltas of sediment they created could remain visible as geological features for many millions of years. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and where the door opens for our 100,000-year-old society. Scientists still argue whether the PETM was caused by a massive burst of volcanic activity, the sudden release of frozen methane from the seabed, or some other unknown trigger. Because they can't be 100% certain of a natural cause, it leaves a sliver of possibility. Could this, or other less dramatic spikes in the geological record, be the faint echo of a civilization that rose, industrialized, and fell long before the first primate ever walked upright? If we apply this same logic, we can search for a similar, if smaller, anomaly in the rock and ice core records from 100,000 years ago. The clue wouldn't be a ruin, it would be a whisper in the planet's chemistry. But this search for a geological scar, for a fingerprint of pollution and industry, is based on a colossal assumption. It assumes that any advanced civilization would look like us. It presumes that the path to sophistication must, inevitably, pass through fire, smoke, and steel. We are looking for our own reflection in the deep past, holding up a mirror and hoping to see a familiar face. But what if they took a different path entirely? What if their advancement wasn't about conquering nature, but about partnering with it? What if their technological revolution was silent, green, and alive? you have to break free from your own technological mirror. Advanced doesn't have to mean digging things out of the ground and burning them. A society could prioritize biology over physics, ecology over industry. They might have seen our path, the path of metal, combustion, and brute force, as primitive, clumsy, and hideously destructive. Their journey could have been one of elegance and symbiosis. Imagine a biotech that is so sophisticated it leaves behind almost nothing but healthy soil and thriving ecosystems. Their architecture wouldn't be carved from dead stone or forged from smelted ore. It would be grown. Imagine them learning to guide the root systems of immense, banyan-like trees to form the walls and arches of their homes, creating structures that were not only strong and self-repairing, but were fully alive. Their light wouldn't come from a flickering fire or a sterile electric bulb, but from a soft, persistent glow cultivated from bioluminescent fungi, its brightness controlled by altering its nutrient supply. Their tools, instead of being chipped from flint or hammered from iron, might be crafted from incredibly dense, engineered ceramics, fired by geothermal heat. Or perhaps they were made from biological materials, polymers and proteins that could be grown and shaped, creating blades sharper than steel that would, after their useful life, simply decompose back into the earth. This is a materials science we are only just beginning to dream of. This isn't pure fantasy. We have a solid mainstream historical fact showing that early humans were already thinking this way. In the Amazon basin, ancient peoples created a substance we now call terra preta, or black earth. It's a remarkably fertile, man-made soil, which they produced by methodically mixing charcoal, bone, pottery shards, and organic waste. They didn't just farm the jungle. They actively engineered their environment, creating a sustainable agricultural system that supported large populations for centuries. The soil they created is still fertile today, thousands of years later. They were bioengineers, using life to foster more life. The potential for this kind of mastery is not science fiction. It is now concrete scientific evidence in our own time. The discovery of CRISPR gene editing technology has given us the ability to alter the DNA of living organisms with staggering precision. We can now, in theory, program life itself. A civilization that had a 100,000-year head start on this kind of science could have achieved things we would see as magic. They could have designed plants that produce structural materials, organisms that generate clean energy, or even used biology to heal and regenerate their own bodies in ways we can't yet comprehend. Their technology would be all around us, but we would mistake it for the natural world. It's a quirky tidbit of biology that the baobab tree of Africa and Australia can live for thousands of years, and its massive trunk is often naturally hollow, providing shelter for animals and even people. Now imagine an advanced culture that didn't just find these trees, but learned to cultivate them, to gently shape their growth over centuries to create permanent living homes and community centers, perfectly adapted to their environment. Why build a dead house that will crumble when you can grow a living one that will last for millennia? This kind of society, deeply intertwined with the cycles of its environment, would be incredibly resilient in some ways, but terrifyingly fragile in others. This brings us to a great historical mystery. Historians still argue whether the collapse of the Indus Valley Civilization, one of the world's first great urban cultures, was caused by climate change that dried up the rivers they depended on, or by internal social and political failures. It's a critical debate because it shows how even a vast, sophisticated society can vanish when its delicate ecological balance is broken. An advanced biological civilization from 100,000 years ago would be even more vulnerable to such a collapse, perhaps leaving nothing behind but a forest that holds a forgotten secret. Let's give them a name. Let's call them the Etherlands, from an old word meaning noble or natural. Now, you must walk into their world. Forget streets, forget right angles, forget stone. The settlement you enter is a city that breathes. It is not built on the landscape, it is woven from it. You walk into a colossal cultivated grove, a forest engineered over millennia. The homes are vast, hollowed-out chambers within the trunks of trees that dwarf the California redwoods, their growth guided over centuries to create spiraling, multi-level dwellings. Bridges are not made of wood, but are living roots, coaxed across the chasms between trees. And as dusk falls, the pathways don't require torches. They begin to glow with a soft, ethereal blue-green light, the work of a carefully tended bioluminescent moss that lines the forest floor. There is no sound of industry, only the rustle of leaves, the flow of water, and the hum of life. This entire society is built on a single core philosophy: harmony over conquest. They would view our relentless expansion, our need to pave over nature and extract its resources, as a profound spiritual sickness. Their goal was not growth, but balance. Their population was deliberately kept small and stable, never exceeding the carrying capacity of their engineered ecosystem. They understood, in a way we are only just beginning to grasp, that a planet is a closed system, and infinite growth is the ideology of a cancer cell. Their energy systems reflected this. They were completely decentralized. They tapped geothermal vents for heat and steam. They diverted small streams through elegant, water wheel-like structures made of hardened wood to generate kinetic power. And their greatest achievement was a form of enhanced photosynthesis. They had engineered plants that could capture and store solar energy with incredible efficiency, which could then be tapped as needed. No smoke, no pollution, no geological scar. You might think such a landscape-scale project is impossible without massive industrial machinery. But as a mainstream historical fact, we know that ancient cultures were capable of enormous, mysterious undertakings without it. The Nazca lines in the deserts of Peru are a perfect example. Created over 2,000 years ago, these are gigantic geoglyphs, images of animals, plants, and geometric shapes, etched into the desert floor, so large they can only be fully appreciated from the air. We still don't know exactly why they were made, but they prove that ancient people could organize themselves to alter entire landscapes with precision and artistic vision. The Etherlands living city is simply the same impulse, guided by a different biological science. And what about their communication? Without wires or radio waves, how would a decentralized society stay connected? The scientific evidence for their method might be growing right under our feet. We now know that forests are connected by a vast, intricate underground network of fungal threads called mycelium. Dubbed the Wood Wide Web, this network allows trees to share nutrients, send distress signals about drought or disease, and even sabotage unwelcome plants. It is a biological information superhighway. What if the Etherlands learned to tap into this network? What if they could encode and transmit complex information through the forest itself? Their society would be in constant, silent communication, a single, collective consciousness rooted in the earth. This deep connection to biology might have had strange, even dangerous side effects. As a quirky historical tidbit, consider the dancing plague of 1518 in Strasbourg, France. For reasons that are still a complete mystery, hundreds of people began to dance uncontrollably, some for days on end, until they collapsed from exhaustion or death. It was a bizarre, inexplicable biological event. It's a humbling reminder of how little we understand the strange potentials of human psychology and physiology when placed under unusual stress. Perhaps the Etherland's deep biological integration made them susceptible to phenomena we can't even imagine. It's a thought that connects to a very real archaeological puzzle. All over southern Africa, there are hundreds of thousands of complex, grid-like stone ruins. Archaeologists still argue whether these are simply ancient cattle kraals, enclosures from the last few centuries, or the much older, heavily eroded remains of mysterious settlements built by an unknown culture. From the ground, they are a confusing jumble, but from the air, they show a stunningly organized, almost cellular pattern. Could these be the faintest, most ancient footprints of a society organized on a completely different principle, a ghost of a different way of living etched in stone? In this living city of the Etherlands, you find no libraries. There are no scrolls, no carved stone tablets, no humming data centers. This presents you with a profound puzzle. A society this sophisticated must possess a colossal amount of knowledge. Generations of scientific observation, complex engineering principles for their bioarchitecture, vast histories, and rich philosophies. But where is it all kept? If their entire world is designed to be biodegradable and ephemeral, how do they achieve permanence for their most valuable possession, their knowledge? The answer is twofold. They perfected the most ancient form of storage and then transcended it with a technology we are only just beginning to comprehend. First, you must imagine an oral tradition so refined and disciplined that it bears little resemblance to a simple bedtime story. In our world, writing made our memories lazy. We outsourced the job of remembering to paper and hard drives. The Etherlands never did. For them, memory was a sacred art, a muscle trained to an Olympic level. Their knowledge was encoded in immense epic songs, where the rhythm and meter were not just artistic, but served as mnemonic error-correcting codes. History was woven into genealogies that were recited with perfect fidelity, and scientific principles were embedded in complex ritual dances, where each movement represented a celestial alignment or a step in a chemical process. To be a law master in their society was a position of the highest honor, a living library who had committed tens of thousands of verses to flawless memory. You might think this is impossible, that memory is too fragile, but we have a powerful mainstream historical fact that proves it can be done. Aboriginal Australian cultures have maintained some of the most complex and long-lasting oral traditions on Earth. Their stories and star maps, passed down from generation to generation through song and ceremony, have been shown to accurately describe real astronomical events and landscape changes, such as sea level rise, that happened over 10,000 years ago. Their culture proves that a society can maintain an accurate record of its deep past for millennia without a single written word. But the Etherlands went a step further, into a realm that was uniquely their own. Their ultimate archive was the forest itself. They developed a form of biological data storage. As a stunning piece of scientific evidence from our own time, scientists in the 21st century have successfully demonstrated that it's possible to encode vast amounts of digital data, a movie, a computer operating system, a book, onto synthetic DNA molecules, and then retrieve it with perfect accuracy. A single gram of data can theoretically hold more information than 1 trillion CDs. It is the most dense and durable information storage medium known to exist. For the Ithilans, this wasn't a laboratory trick. It was the foundation of their civilization. They learned to encode their histories, their science, their art, directly into the genetic code of the long living trees that formed their city. The forest was their library. To read a book, you would gently take a leaf, not to read words on its surface, but to access the data stored within its very cells, perhaps through some form of biological interface. And this concept of non-written information systems is not without precedent. As a quirky historical tidbit, the great Inca Empire, which controlled a vast stretch of South America, had no written language as we know it. Instead, they used a device called a quipu. It was a complex system of colored, knotted strings. For centuries, we thought these were simple accounting tools, but we now believe they hold a much richer record of histories, laws, and stories, a kind of three-dimensional code that we still haven't managed to fully decipher. The quipu is a profound reminder that complex information can be stored in formats we might not even recognize as language. This reliance on a living, unwritten archive would have fundamentally shaped how the Ithilans thought. It raises a fascinating question that is still a topic of intense scholarly debate today. Linguists and neuroscientists still argue whether the very act of learning to read and write fundamentally changes how a human brain processes information and conceptualizes the past. Writing allows for a kind of detached, linear analysis. A purely oral or biological information system might foster a more holistic, cyclical, and interconnected way of thinking. Did we gain the power of the index and the footnote, but lose a deeper, more integrated form of consciousness? Perhaps the Ithilans' knowledge wasn't just something they accessed, it was something they were a part of, literally living inside the pages of their greatest work. If you were to mount a serious expedition to find the Ithilans, you wouldn't start by digging in a desert or a jungle. You would put on a wetsuit. The most likely, the most tantalizing, and the most frustratingly inaccessible hiding place for any ancient civilization is not on the land at all. It is beneath the waves. You have to remember that map of the world from 100,000 years ago, with its dramatically lower sea levels. The vast coastal plains that were exposed for millennia were not barren wastelands. They were the heartlands. They were the river valleys, the fertile estuaries, the marshlands teeming with game. They were, in all likelihood, the Beverly Hills of the Pleistocene. And then, as the great ice sheets melted, the sea began to rise, slowly, relentlessly, swallowing that entire world. We have a perfect, well-studied example of this. Geologists and archaeologists have a name for the vast, now submerged landmass that once connected Great Britain to mainland Europe. Doggerland. For thousands of years, Doggerland was a rich and temperate landscape of rolling hills and winding rivers, home to herds of mammoths and, crucially, to the humans who hunted them. It was not a temporary land bridge. It was a homeland. Then, starting around 8,000 years ago, the rising seas began to claim it. Its inhabitants were forced back, generation by generation, until a final catastrophic tsunami, likely caused by a submarine landslide off the coast of Norway, delivered the final blow and turned Britain into an island. For a long time, Doggerland was just a theory. But now, as a concrete mainstream historical fact, we know it was real because fishing trawlers in the North Sea have been dredging up proof for decades. They've pulled up the bones of mammoths and lions, beautifully crafted flint tools, and even human remains, all snagged in their nets from the bottom of the sea. Underwater archaeologists have since mapped submerged forests and ancient riverbeds, proving beyond any doubt that a rich inhabited world lies drowned just off the European coast. Doggerland is the ghost of a lost continent, a potent preview of what might be hidden in deeper, older waters. Now, zoom out from Doggerland and consider the entire planet. The scale of the land that was lost is staggering. Geologists estimate that around 25 million square kilometers of land was submerged by the post-Ice Age sea level rise. That is an area larger than the entire continent of North America today. An entire continent's worth of coastal plains, where people would have naturally congregated, simply vanished from the map. So when we search for evidence of ancient humanity, we are searching on the surviving high ground, on the plateaus and in the mountains that were spared the flood. We are looking for clues in the attic, when the entire ground floor of their world is underwater. The scientific evidence for these lost landscapes is now undeniable. Using a technology called bathymetric mapping, ships can send sonar pulses down to the ocean floor, creating highly detailed, three-dimensional maps of what's down there. And what they've found is breathtaking. They have revealed ancient river valleys wider than the Grand Canyon, vast lake systems, and dramatic coastlines, all preserved in the dark, cold stillness of the deep. These are not imaginary features. They are the real topography of a world that no one has seen for 10,000 years. Of course, this search for submerged worlds has its share of tantalizing and controversial mysteries. The most famous is a quirky tidbit known as the Yonaguni Monument, a massive underwater rock formation off the coast of Japan. It features immense flat terraces, 90-degree angles, and features that look uncannily like carved steps and pillars. While most geologists are convinced it's a stunning but entirely natural geological formation, created by sandstone fracturing along its bedding planes, it continues to fuel intense speculation. To some, it is the unmistakable ruin of a sunken, man-made structure. And this brings us to the greatest legend of them all. For centuries, marine archaeologists and historians have argued whether the story of Atlantis, as told by the Greek philosopher Plato, could be a distorted folk memory of a real catastrophic event. The most popular theory links it to the volcanic eruption of the island of Thera, modern Santorini, around 1600 BCE, a cataclysm that destroyed the Minoan civilization. The idea is that a real event, a powerful island civilization suddenly destroyed and sunk by a natural disaster, was passed down for 1,000 years, becoming more and more fantastical until Plato wrote it down. If a 1,000-year-old memory can create a legend like Atlantis, what kind of legend might a 100,000-year-old memory create? The drowned worlds beneath the ocean are a compelling target, but they are still active environments. Currents shift the sediment, and chemical processes slowly work to dissolve whatever lies buried. If you want to find something truly, perfectly preserved, a snapshot of the past frozen in a single moment, you have to go to the most extreme archives on the planet. You have to go to the great ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. Here, preservation isn't a gentle burial in silt. It's an immediate, absolute entombment in a deep freeze that can last for eons. Anything trapped under kilometers of solid ice is hermetically sealed, shielded from erosion, decay, and the prying eyes of future generations. It is a vault built by the planet itself. This isn't just a theory. We have a stunning modern mainstream historical fact that shows us exactly how this process works. In the late 1950s, during the height of the Cold War, The US Army undertook a top-secret project to build a nuclear-powered base inside the Greenland ice sheet. It was called Camp Century. Officially, it was a science station. In reality, it was a proof of concept for a hidden network of tunnels designed to secretly store and launch nuclear missiles. The base was a subterranean city with labs, a hospital, and a theater. But the ice is not a static, dead thing. It is a living, flowing glacier. It moves. The pressure began to deform and crush the tunnels, and by 1967, the base had to be abandoned. The Army took the nuclear reactor, but left the rest of the base, the buildings, the fuel, the waste, assuming it would be buried forever. They were right. Camp Century is now being swallowed by the ice, a modern ruin entombed in a slow-motion collapse, destined to travel with the glacier, and perhaps one day emerge as a very confusing artifact for future geologists. It is a perfect accidental experiment showing how the ice captures and preserves a piece of civilization. For decades, we thought of the land under these great ice sheets as flat and featureless, scoured down to nothing. But modern scientific evidence has revealed this to be completely wrong. Using ice-penetrating radar, which sends signals through the ice to map the bedrock below, scientists have discovered an entire hidden world. And it is spectacular. In Antarctica, they found the Gamburtsev Mountains, a mountain range as large as the European Alps, with sharp peaks and deep valleys, completely buried under 3 miles of ice. They have been nicknamed the Ghost Mountains, because no human eye has ever seen them. And then there is Lake Vostok. The radar revealed an enormous body of liquid water, one of the largest lakes on Earth, trapped under 2.5 miles of ice, and it has been sealed off from the surface world for at least 15 million years. These are not small, isolated features. These are vast, continent-scale landscapes, a pristine piece of an older Earth, locked away in cold storage. If the Etherlands existed before the ice sheets reached their maximum extent, their settlements could, in theory, be down there, crushed but perfectly preserved. For years, scientists were desperate to drill down into Lake Vostok, but they were terrified of contaminating its pristine, ancient ecosystem. After decades of careful planning, Russian scientists finally succeeded in 2012. It's a quirky and astounding tidbit that when they analyzed the first water samples, they found life. They discovered an entire ecosystem of bacteria and other microbes that had evolved in total isolation, in absolute darkness and cold, for millions of years. It was a profound discovery, proof that life can persist in the most extreme and hidden environments imaginable. It also means that if any biological traces of a lost civilization were trapped under the ice, they too could potentially survive, waiting in suspended animation. This all leads to a huge and urgent question that directly impacts this search. The ice has been a reliable vault for millions of years, but that may be changing. As our planet warms, the great ice sheets are beginning to melt at an accelerating rate. This has triggered one of the most critical debates in modern science. Climatologists still argue whether the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets could collapse rapidly in the coming centuries, or if the process will take millennia. The answer has terrifying implications for sea level rise, but it also has implications for archaeology. If the ice melts, will these lost worlds be revealed? Will the Ghost Mountains see the sun for the first time in an age? It presents a strange and unsettling possibility. The very climate crisis that threatens our civilization might be the one thing that could unlock the secrets of a civilization that came before us, revealing their remains just as we are creating our own. The possibility of finding something under the ice is intoxicating. But now you must ask yourself, what would be the most profound discovery? It wouldn't be a tool or a building, or even a piece of their stored DNA data. The most world-altering discovery would be one of them. A body, perfectly preserved in the glacial ice, a silent messenger from a forgotten age. A team of scientists in our time would carefully thaw it, and what they would find would be baffling. The individual, though clearly ancient, would show no signs of the diseases and hardships we see in other prehistoric remains. No arthritis, no evidence of malnutrition, no healed fractures that set poorly. Their cellular structure would seem impossibly resilient, almost ageless. The true shock would come when they analyzed the DNA. It would be human, yes, but with a level of elegance and optimization that would make our own genome look like a rough first draft. The discovery would be that the Etherland's greatest technology was not something they built, but something they became. Their mastery of life itself was not just a science, it was the core of their philosophy. To them, the clumsy act of chipping a stone or smelting a metal would seem laughably primitive. Why force a dead material into a crude shape when you could persuade a living system to grow into a perfect one? They didn't just edit genes the way we are learning to with CRISPR. They understood the deep, underlying language of biology. They saw the entire web of life on the planet as a single, interconnected genetic conversation that had been going on for billions of years. Their science was not about shouting new commands into that conversation, but about learning to listen and then gently adding their own harmonious verses. This philosophy was most apparent in their medicine. Our medical approach is, for the most part, that of a mechanic. We see the body as a machine of pumps, levers, and chemical reactions. If a part is broken, we try to fix it with surgery. If a chemical is out of balance, we flood the system with a drug. The Etherlands were not mechanics. They were gardeners. They saw the body as a self-regulating ecosystem, and their medicine was about giving the body the information and encouragement it needed to heal itself. They wouldn't cut out a diseased organ. They would reactivate the dormant genetic pathways that allowed the body to regenerate a new one from its own healthy cells. You might think this sounds like pure magic, but the scientific evidence for this potential is swimming in our world today. The humble axolotl, a species of salamander, possesses a biological superpower. If it loses a limb, it doesn't just form a stump, it regrows a perfect, fully functional replacement, bone, muscle, nerves, and all. It can even regenerate parts of its brain and spinal cord. This incredible ability isn't magic. It's just a set of genetic instructions that most complex life, including us, has switched off over evolutionary time. The Etherlands simply learned how to switch them back on. A grievous wound would close in minutes, and a lost finger would begin to bud and regrow within a day. Disease was not a foreign invader to be killed, but a sign of imbalance in the ecosystem of the body, which they would correct by guiding their own immune and cellular responses. There's a quirky historical tidbit about a figure from our own ancient world that hints at this kind of biological dialogue. King Mithridates VI of Pontus, who lived around the 1st century BCE, was famously obsessed with and terrified of poison. He is said to have pioneered a practice now called Mithridatism, the art of protecting oneself by ingesting gradually increasing non-lethal doses of various poisons over many years training his body to build a tolerance. It's a crude and dangerous form of biohacking, but it represents the same core idea, a conscious effort to instruct your own biology to adapt and overcome a threat from within. This mastery naturally extended to how they fed themselves. Their agriculture was not the back-breaking, soil-depleting monoculture that we practice. They created vast, self-sustaining perennial food forests. A perfect small-scale example of this principle is the mainstream historical fact of Three Sisters agriculture, practiced by various Native American peoples. They would plant corn, beans, and squash together. The corn provides a natural stalk for the beans to climb. The beans, in turn, pull nitrogen from the air and fix it in the soil, fertilizing the corn. The broad-leafed squash spreads across the ground, preventing weeds and keeping the soil moist. It's a simple, elegant, symbiotic system. The Aethelans took this concept to its ultimate conclusion. Their food forests were complex, multi-layered ecosystems that looked like wild jungles to an untrained eye, but were, in fact, meticulously designed edible landscapes. Towering canopy layers of nut and fruit trees, a sub-layer of berry bushes and shrubs, vining plants weaving through the branches, and a ground cover of edible greens and nitrogen-fixing plants, all interspersed with cultivated mushrooms growing on decaying logs. No plowing, no weeding, no fertilizing. The forest fed and renewed itself, producing an incredible abundance of food year-round. This leads to a truly mind-bending speculative question. Paleontologists still argue whether the sudden Cambrian explosion of life 540 million years ago, a period where most major animal groups appear in the fossil record with shocking speed, was the result of a slow, hidden evolutionary build-up, or was triggered by a sudden environmental change. Could a civilization that mastered life itself, on a geological timescale, have intentionally or accidentally created such a burst of planetary biodiversity? Their grandest experiment leaving a fossilized echo that baffles us to this day. With such profound mastery over the building blocks of life itself, you have to ask the inevitable, unsettling question. What did they do with this power? Did they turn it on each other? Our own history is a relentless, blood-soaked story of conflict. Every technological advance, from the forging of bronze to the splitting of the atom, was swiftly turned into a more efficient way for one group of humans to kill another. It seems to be our most predictable, most tragic instinct. But to the Aethelans, a war would have been more than just tragic. It would have been a logical and biological impossibility, a form of societal autoimmune disease. Their social structure grew organically from their relationship with their environment. Our societies are fundamentally shaped by the concept of scarcity. We fight over land, over water, over oil, over gold, because we believe these resources are finite. We hoard and we conquer. The Aethelans existed in a system of managed abundance. Their living cities and perennial food forests were designed to be self-renewing, providing more than enough for everyone. The idea of owning a piece of the forest would be as absurd to them as owning a piece of the air. Wealth was not measured in accumulated possessions, but in the health and vitality of the ecosystem of which they were a part. Why would you attack your neighbor to steal their fruit trees when you could simply ask them for the knowledge to grow your own? Resource management for them wasn't a zero-sum game. It was a collaborative art. This rejection of conflict was not just a philosophy. It was a biological reality for them. Our primate brains are wired with a deep-seated instinct for tribalism, for distinguishing us from them. The scientific evidence for this can be found in our own neurochemistry. Hormones like oxytocin, and vasopressin are crucial for social bonding. They create feelings of love, trust, and empathy that bind a family or a community together. But they have a dark side. The very same hormones can increase suspicion, defensiveness, and aggression toward those we perceive as outsiders. It's the biological root of xenophobia. The Etherlands, with their deep understanding of their own biology, would have seen this as a dangerous, primitive glitch in their own software. It is plausible they developed methods, perhaps through meditative practice, or even through subtle adjustments to their environment and diet, to modulate these hormonal responses, expanding their circle of empathy to include all members of their species. You might think a large-scale, peaceful society is a utopian dream. But as a quirky tidbit from the natural world, we have a living primate model for it. We share about 99% of our DNA with both chimpanzees and bonobos. Chimpanzee societies are famously patriarchal, territorial, and violent. Bonobo societies are matriarchal, egalitarian, and remarkably peaceful. They famously use social grooming and sexual contact to diffuse tension and resolve conflicts before they can escalate into violence. They are living proof that being a highly intelligent primate does not inevitably lead to warfare. They offer a different path, one based on affiliation instead of domination. This idea of a society deliberately built on peace has a powerful echo in our own much more recent history. The mainstream historical fact of the Haudenosaunee, or the Iroquois Confederacy in North America, is a stunning example. Before their federation, the 5 nations were locked in a cycle of brutal warfare. Then, according to their oral tradition, a figure known as the Great Peacemaker appeared, bringing a constitution called the Great Law of Peace. He persuaded the warring nations to bury their weapons and form a sophisticated, representative government based on principles of mutual respect and consensus. It was one of the world's first and longest-lasting deliberative democracies, created specifically to end war. So what happened when conflict did arise among the Etherlands? It wasn't ignored, it was treated. But it wasn't a matter for judges and executioners. Their method of conflict resolution was likely ritualistic and deeply psychological. Instead of a trial, you might have a shared consciousness ceremony. Aided by individuals who had trained their minds to be powerful empathic conduits, the conflicting parties would be guided into a state where they could genuinely experience the other's perspective, their pain, their fear, their motivations. The goal was not to determine guilt, but to achieve understanding and restore balance to the community's social fabric. This brings us to one of the most fundamental and unresolved questions in our own story. Anthropologists and archaeologists still fiercely debate whether organized warfare is an ancient, innate part of the human condition or a more recent invention that arose with agriculture, property, and settled societies. The very existence of the Etherlands, even as a hypothesis, suggests a third option, that it is neither innate nor inevitable, but a choice. They stand as a silent testament to the idea that a species can become advanced enough to choose a different path, to consciously engineer its own peace. This vision of a peaceful, biologically advanced society is beautiful, almost achingly so. But it also raises a crucial question. If the Etherlands were not conquerors, what happened when they encountered the other, less advanced human groups who shared their world? Did they retreat into an ever more isolated enclave? Or did they, perhaps, do something else? Even if their living cities have long since turned to dust, even if their last survivors lie perfectly preserved but undiscovered in a glacial tomb, there is one archive that is almost impossible to destroy. It is the most intimate, the most resilient, and the most personal historical record of all. It is carried inside you. Your DNA is a living library, a 4-billion-year-old story of survival, and its most recent chapters may contain the ghost of a world you never knew existed. You have to understand that your genome is not a pure, unbroken lineage of Homo sapiens. It's a mosaic. The scientific evidence for this is now overwhelming and has completely rewritten the story of human origins. As our ancestors migrated out of Africa, they met and, on occasion, interbred with their archaic human cousins who were already living in Europe and Asia. The result is that if your ancestry is from outside of sub-Saharan Africa, you carry, on average, between 1% and 2% Neanderthal DNA in your genome. If your ancestry is from parts of Asia or Oceania, you may also carry a small but significant percentage of DNA from another archaic group, the Denisovans. These are not theories. They are measurable genetic facts. This ancient DNA isn't just junk. It has had real, tangible effects, influencing everything from our immune systems to our ability to adapt to high altitudes. You are, in a very real sense, a living fossil, a hybrid carrying the echoes of other kinds of human. This is where the story takes a thrilling, speculative leap. For years, geneticists have been finding strange things in the human genome. When they sequence the DNA of certain modern populations, they find stretches of code that don't look like they came from Homo sapiens. But they also don't match the DNA of Neanderthals or Denisovans. They are the clear genetic fingerprints of a completely unknown, mysterious, archaic human. Scientists call them ghost populations. We have no bones for them, no tools we can definitively attribute to them. We only have their genetic shadow, hiding in plain sight within our own cells. And this begs the question, what if one of these ghost populations isn't some primitive, long-lost relative, but is, in fact, the remnant of the Etherlands? Imagine their civilization collapsing. Imagine the survivors, scattered and few, stripped of their advanced biological knowledge and forced to live simpler lives. Over time, they would have been absorbed into the much larger, more widespread populations of normal Homo sapiens. They wouldn't have been conquered, they would have just blended. Their unique genetic legacy, the product of their long journey into biological mastery, would have been diluted, chopped into ever smaller fragments with each passing generation, and scattered across the human gene pool. We would be searching for the ruins of their cities, when the real ruins are the fragmented, almost unrecognizable strings of their DNA that we all carry. The very discovery of these other human groups is a lesson in how a ghost can become real. As a mainstream historical fact, the Denisovans were identified as a new species, not from a massive skull or a complete skeleton, but from a single tiny fragment of a pinky finger bone found in a cave in Siberia in 2010. That one tiny bone contained enough preserved DNA to reveal an entire, previously unknown branch of the human family tree. It's the ultimate proof that an entire population can leave behind nothing but a genetic whisper. This ancient intermingling might have even conferred unique abilities. It's a quirky tidbit of modern genetics that the Bajo people of Southeast Asia, often called sea nomads, have evolved genetically enlarged spleens. Their spleens act like a biological scuba tank, storing oxygenated red blood cells, which allows them to hold their breath and hunt underwater for astonishing lengths of time. It's a recent, specialized adaptation. What if the Etherlands' legacy wasn't something as obvious as that, but something more subtle? a predisposition for heightened empathy, a talent for intuitive understanding of living systems, or a resilient cellular repair mechanism. A gift from a forgotten ancestor, now so diluted we mistake it for random human variation. Of course, the precise details of our genetic past are still being mapped, and geneticists still argue about precisely where and when the multiple interbreeding events between archaic humans and Homo sapiens took place. Was it a single, prolonged period of contact, or a series of brief encounters across a vast landscape? The data is complex, and the debate is fierce, but the one thing it confirms is that our past was a much more crowded and interconnected place than we ever used to believe. The human family was never a single straight trunk. It was always a tangled, braided stream. And flowing within that stream, perhaps, are the last living remnants of a world that chose a different path. If their legacy is a faint whisper in your DNA, then it might also be a faint, fragmented echo in our oldest stories. You have to imagine the world after the fall of the Etherlands. The few survivors, scattered and traumatized, are absorbed into simpler hunter-gatherer groups. They no longer have the knowledge to maintain their living technology, but they have memories. They have stories. They tell their children, and their children's children, of a time before. A world of living cities and impossible peace. A time when humanity lived as a partner with nature, not its master. Over hundreds of generations, these stories would be worn smooth, like a stone in a river. The precise details of biology and engineering would fade, replaced by the simpler, more powerful language of myth. A living city becomes a magical garden. A mastery of genetics becomes the ability to speak with animals, and the great cataclysm that ended their world becomes the wrath of a god. Look at the tapestry of global mythology, and you see the same strange pattern repeating in cultures that had no contact with one another. It is the myth of a golden age, a lost paradise. The ancient Greeks spoke of it, a time when the first race of humans lived like gods, free from toil and sorrow. The ancient Egyptians wrote of Zep Tepi, the first time, a sacred age when gods walked the earth and established the principles of civilization. The Judeo-Christian tradition has the Garden of Eden, a perfect paradise where humanity lived in effortless harmony with nature before a tragic fall from grace. And the Aboriginal peoples of Australia hold the concept of the dream time, a sacred, timeless era when great ancestral beings sang the world into existence. Are these all just wishful thinking, a universal human yearning for a simpler past? Or are they the distorted, collective memories of a real world that was lost? The most persistent and widespread of these story fossils is the myth of the Great Flood. The story of Noah and his ark is the most famous version, but it's far from the oldest. This is a crucial mainstream historical fact. The biblical story is a direct descendant of a much more ancient Mesopotamian tale found in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which predates the known Hebrew texts by at least 1,000 years. In it, a wise man named Utnapishtim is warned by a god to build a great boat to save his family and the world's creatures from a deluge sent by angry deities. The parallels are so exact that it's clear we are looking at a story that was passed down and retold for millennia in the ancient Near East. But the story isn't just found there. It's everywhere. Ancient cultures in India, China, the Americas, and the South Pacific all have their own powerful indigenous myths of a world-destroying flood. For a long time, we dismissed these as mere fables. But the scientific evidence is now clear that our ancestors lived through a period of catastrophic, world-altering floods. As the last ice age ended, the melting of the colossal glaciers released an unimaginable volume of water. Geologists have found evidence for the flooding of the Black Sea around 7,500 years ago, when the rising Mediterranean breached the Bosporus Strait and cascaded into the freshwater lake below with the force of 200 Niagara Falls, turning it into a saltwater sea and displacing countless people along its shores. In North America, they've found evidence of the Missoula megafloods, a series of cataclysmic events where a massive glacial lake repeatedly burst its ice dam, sending a wall of water hundreds of feet high roaring across the landscape of the Pacific Northwest. These were real apocalypses. Sometimes these memories attach themselves to specific local places. As a quirky historical tidbit, the folklore of Cornwall in England is haunted by the story of Lyonesse, a rich and beautiful kingdom that was supposedly swallowed by the ocean in a single night. While it's just a legend, it's a legend that exists in a place where geologists know the sea level has risen dramatically since the Ice Age, submerging the low-lying plains that once connected the Scilly Isles to the mainland. Lyonesse may be a folk memory of a real, local drowning. Now, imagine this process on a global scale. The slow, inexorable flooding of 25 million square kilometers of the world's best real estate. It's not hard to see how such a profound, shared trauma could burn itself into the human psyche, emerging generations later as a myth. And this leads to a great intellectual schism. Mythologists and historians still argue whether these universal myths, like the Great Flood, are evidence of a single, shared historical event from the deep past, or if they simply arise independently from common human psychological archetypes and experiences. Are we remembering one great flood, or do all people who live near water and fear its power eventually invent a similar story? The answer is probably a bit of both. But the possibility remains that in these tales of a beautiful world lost to a watery cataclysm, we are hearing the faintest final whisper of the Etherlands. So, you have this image of the Etherlands, a society woven into the very fabric of the planet, their knowledge stored in living libraries, their legacy a faint whisper in your own genes and in the oldest myths of a lost golden age. It's a beautiful, resilient vision. But now you must confront the most brutal question of all. If they were so wise, so powerful, so in tune with their world, where are they? The answer may be that their greatest strength was also their most profound, most fatal weakness. Their deep symbiotic connection to the planetary ecosystem meant that when the planet itself broke, they broke with it. They were not destroyed by an enemy. They were destroyed by their home. You must understand that the climate of the last ice age was not a long, stable winter. It was a psychotic, unpredictable beast. Our current climate, the relatively placid 10,000-year period of the Holocene, in which all of our own civilization has arisen, is a historical anomaly. The norm, for the 100,000 years before that, was chaos. And the name for that chaos is the Dansgaard-Oeschger event, or DO event. This is the first great hammer that could have shattered the Etherlands world. The scientific evidence for these events is written with exquisite precision in the Greenland ice cores. When scientists analyze the layers of ancient ice, they look at the ratio of different oxygen isotopes. This ratio acts as a direct, highly accurate thermometer for the ancient atmosphere. And what the ice shows is terrifying. The climate didn't just warm and cool gently, it snapped. Over and over again, the temperature in the northern hemisphere would suddenly, violently, jump upwards by as much as 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. That's up to 27 degrees Fahrenheit, in the space of just a few decades. The world would flip from a deep freeze to a climate warmer than today's in the span of a single human lifetime. Then, it would gradually cool back down, only to snap back up again a few centuries or millennia later. It was a planetary fever that spiked and broke again and again, more than 25 times during the last glacial period. Now imagine what that would do to the Etherland's delicate living world. Their giant engineered trees, which formed their homes, were adapted to a specific climate. A sudden, massive temperature swing would be a catastrophic shock to their physiology. The perennial food forests, a complex web of species designed to work in symbiosis, would be thrown into chaos. Key pollinating insects would die off, their life cycles completely desynchronized from the plants they depended on. The mycelial network, their wood wide web, could suffer a systemic collapse as its host trees came under stress, severing their lines of communication. The society built on managed abundance would be plunged almost overnight into an age of unprecedented scarcity and ecological collapse. We know for a mainstream historical fact that even smaller, more recent climate shocks have had devastating effects on human societies. Around 8,200 years ago, a sudden cold snap known as the 8.2 kilo-year event caused temperatures to drop for about 150 years. This event, now linked to the final drainage of a giant glacial lake in North America, caused widespread drought in the Near East and is believed to be responsible for the abandonment of many of the very first agricultural settlements. If a relatively minor blip could disrupt early farmers, what would a full-blown DO event do to a civilization, even an advanced one, that was completely dependent on a stable ecosystem? These ancient catastrophes left behind strange, mysterious scars on the landscape. As a quirky tidbit, geologists across North America have found thin, dark layers of sediment, known as black mats. That date precisely to the beginning of the Younger Dryas cold snap around 12,900 years ago. These mats are often found directly on top of the last layer containing the fossils of megafauna, like mammoths. They are a stark black line in the geologic record, marking a moment of extinction. We still don't know exactly what they are, the remnants of massive wildfires, widespread algal blooms, or something more exotic. But they are a physical reminder of how a sudden climate shift can write a tombstone for an entire ecosystem. The Etherlands, for all their wisdom, would have been helpless. Their biological mastery was a mastery of a system, but they couldn't control the fundamental parameters of that system: the planet's orbit, the ocean's currents, the stability of the ice sheets. The very forces that drove these violent climate swings are still not fully understood. Climatologists still argue whether these Dansgaard-Oeschger cycles were driven by internal instabilities and reorganizations within the North Atlantic ice sheets, or if they were triggered by periodic changes in the sun's output and its complex interaction with ocean circulation. The Etherlands might not have known what was hitting them. They would have only known that the world they had so carefully cultivated was dying around them. The symphony of life they had conducted for millennia dissolving into a cacophony of collapse. The death delivered by the climate hammer was a slow one, a grinding, agonizing dissolution over centuries. But there is another kind of death that comes to a planet, one that offers no time to adapt, no chance to flee. It is a death that arrives without warning, from the silent, black emptiness of space. It is the second great hammer that could have struck the Etherlands. Fire from the sky. Their deep connection to the Earth would have been no defense against a threat that didn't come from the Earth at all. In a single blinding moment, their entire world, their living cities, their biological libraries, everything they had ever built, could have been utterly and completely vaporized. We know, as a definitive mainstream historical fact, that the Earth has been struck by cosmic objects with world-ending power before. The most famous is the asteroid that struck the Yucatan Peninsula 66 million years ago. It was a rock at least 6 miles wide, and it hit with the energy of billions of nuclear bombs. The impact carved out the Chicxulub crater, a 110-mile-wide scar on the planet, and threw so much superheated debris into the atmosphere that it literally baked the surface of the Earth, triggering global firestorms and a nuclear winter that ended the 150-million-year reign of the dinosaurs. It was a true planetary reset button. But not all impacts are that big, and not all of them leave such an obvious calling card. What if the object that hit the Etherlands world was much smaller? An asteroid or a fragment of a comet, say, a few hundred meters across. It wouldn't be a planet killer, but it would absolutely be a civilization killer. The impact would release more energy than all the nuclear weapons on Earth combined. The problem for future archaeologists is that an impact of this size, especially if it struck a continental ice sheet or the deep ocean, might not leave a clear, identifiable crater that could survive 100,000 years of geology. The evidence would be scattered, subtle, and easily missed. But there is a third, even more terrifying possibility. The object doesn't even have to hit the ground. It can detonate in the atmosphere. This is called an airburst, and we have a perfect, chilling modern example of what it can do. As a quirky historical tidbit, on the morning of June 30th, 1908, a massive explosion occurred over a remote region of Siberia called Tunguska. The blast was 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It flattened over 80 million trees across an area of 830 square miles, an area larger than the entire city of London. Witnesses reported seeing a column of blue light, nearly as bright as the sun, moving across the sky, followed by a flash and a sound like artillery fire. Yet, when investigators finally reached the remote site years later, they found no impact crater. The leading theory is that a small asteroid or comet entered the atmosphere and exploded several miles above the ground. The Tunguska event is a stark reminder that you can have a cataclysm without a crater. Now imagine an event like that, or perhaps one 10 times more powerful, detonating directly over the heartland of the Etherlands. Their living city would be annihilated in a flash of heat and a devastating shock wave, leaving behind a scorched, flattened landscape that nature would begin to reclaim within years. A perfect, traceless apocalypse. This isn't just a wild guess. This airburst catastrophe is the core of a very real, very contentious scientific hypothesis. The scientific evidence comes from the Younger Dryas boundary, that same mysterious layer from 12,900 years ago that marks the beginning of the last great cold snap and the extinction of the mammoths. Across multiple continents, scientists have found a thin layer of sediment that contains impact markers, microscopic nanodiamonds that can only be formed under extreme temperature and pressure, tiny spheres of melted rock, and elevated levels of iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in asteroids. Proponents of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis argue that these are the scattered remnants of a fragmented comet that exploded in a series of massive air bursts over North America, triggering the climate shift and the extinctions. This theory is the subject of one of the most heated scholarly debates in modern geology. Geologists and astronomers still argue intensely about the frequency and threat level of these smaller, city-killer-sized asteroids and comets. Are Tunguska-level events a once-in-1,000 years occurrence, or are they more frequent? Is the evidence at the Younger Dryas boundary definitive proof of an impact, or could it be explained by other terrestrial processes? The debate is fierce because the answer tells us not only about the past, but about how safe we are in the present. For the Ethelans, the debate would have been moot. They would have only known that one night, a new, impossibly bright star appeared in their sky, a star that grew brighter and brighter until it outshone the sun itself. And then there was only light, and heat, and silence. The planet can break you with its fevers. The cosmos can strike you down with a stone. These are clean, impersonal deaths. But there is a third hammer, a final executioner, and it is the most terrifying of all because it rises from within. It is the enemy in the mirror. What if the Aethelans, in all their biological wisdom, were not murdered by their world? What if they committed a perfect, silent suicide? Their end may not have been a cataclysm written in the geological record, but a tragedy whispered only in the language of their own corrupted genes and broken philosophy. Their greatest strength was their mastery of life, their ability to speak the language of DNA. But language can be used to write poetry, or to craft a death sentence. In our own time, we, the clumsy apprentices of this great art, are already wrestling with its dark potential. The scientific evidence for this peril is found in a technology called a gene drive. It is a tool of genetic engineering so powerful that many of its creators are terrified of it. A gene drive is a genetic element that cheats the laws of inheritance. Normally, an offspring has a 50% chance of inheriting a specific gene from a parent. A gene drive can increase that to nearly 100%, forcing a trait to spread through an entire population with shocking speed. We are now seriously considering using it to wipe out malaria-carrying mosquitoes. But what if we make a mistake? What if the drive mutates and starts affecting other insects? What if we accidentally crash an entire ecosystem? A gene drive is a biological fire that, once released, may be impossible to extinguish. Now imagine the Ethelans, true masters of this science. They would have seen a flaw in their perfect world, a persistent fungal blight on a food tree, a parasitic insect, and they would have designed a perfect, elegant solution. A gene drive, delivered by a modified virus that would target and sterilize only that single species, erasing it from their world forever. But life is a tangled bank. It is messy and unpredictable. The virus mutates by a single, infinitesimal letter of its genetic code. It is no longer so specific. It jumps to the pollinating insects that were essential for the food forest, or it jumps to the mycelial network, the very nervous system of their world, causing a catastrophic cascading failure. In their attempt to weed their perfect garden, they accidentally poisoned the soil. Their world would not have burned. It would have simply unraveled. A slow, quiet, biological apocalypse of their own making. Or perhaps it was more deliberate. Perhaps their peace was not as absolute as we imagine. In a moment of fear, one faction could have designed a plague targeted not at an insect, but at their rivals. a genetic weapon of unimaginable horror. This idea of a society destroying itself through its own actions is not a fantasy. It is one of the most powerful and tragic stories from our own history. The mainstream historical fact of the collapse of the civilization on Easter Island, Rapa Nui, is a grim, cautionary tale. The traditional narrative, pieced together by early archaeologists, tells of a Polynesian people who found a lush, forested island paradise. They thrived, and their culture became obsessed with carving and erecting the giant stone statues, the moai, for which the island is famous. This obsession, the story goes, required immense resources: trees for lumber to roll the statues, rope, and manpower. They cut down every last tree, leading to catastrophic soil erosion. Without wood for canoes, they could no longer fish effectively. The ecosystem collapsed, leading to starvation, warfare, and cannibalism. They had, in their hubris, consumed their entire world. This vision of the past leads us to a crucial and still unresolved scholarly debate. Look to the jungles of Central America, at the magnificent abandoned stone cities of the Maya. Archaeologists and historians still argue fiercely whether the classic Maya collapse around 900 AD was primarily caused by environmental factors, like a series of prolonged, devastating droughts, or by internal factors like endemic warfare between the city-states, political instability, and a breakdown of their social contract. Was it their world that failed them, or did they fail themselves? The answer is likely both, a feedback loop of environmental stress and social decay. This brings us to the second, and perhaps more chilling, form of aetherland self-destruction. It was not a biological accident, but a philosophical one. What happens to a society that has solved all its problems? When there is no hunger to sate, no disease to cure, no external enemy to fight? What is the purpose of a civilization? It is a quirky and unsettling tidbit of psychology that humans often seem to require struggle to find meaning. We thrive on overcoming obstacles. The Aetherlands may have achieved a state of such perfect balance and harmony that they found themselves in a state of profound, species-wide ennui. Their world was a finished painting. There was nothing left to add. They were the masters of life, but they had forgotten why it was worth living. Their end, then, was not a bang, but a slow, collective sigh. The birth rates would have declined, not from plague, but from choice. They simply stopped having children. They stopped maintaining the complex living systems, letting the great trees grow wild, the bioluminescent pathways dim and flicker out. They lost the will to continue their own story. The last generations of Aetherlands would have been the loneliest beings in history, the quiet, graceful curators of a magnificent museum, walking its halls as the lights went out, one by one. The end did not come with a bang. It came with a long, drawn-out sigh. Whether their world was unraveled by a biological miscalculation, a philosophical weariness, or a combination of both, the aftermath is not a smoking ruin. It is a slow, quiet, and almost graceful decay. You watch as the generations pass in this long twilight. The first children born after the collapse still live within the great, hollowed trees, but something is different. The soft green light of the bioluminescent pathways begins to sputter in places, patches of darkness returning to the forest floor for the first time in millennia. No one quite remembers the precise nutrient balance required to keep them vibrant. The complex systems of the perennial food forests, without their master gardeners, begin to falter. An invasive vine, once carefully managed, now chokes a row of fruit-bearing shrubs. The taste of the food is blander, the abundance a little less certain. By the third generation, the great living structures are no longer being actively shaped. The knowledge is simply gone. It's like a city maintenance department that has lost all its funding and all its instruction manuals at the same time. A root bridge, which should have been guided to strengthen a new connection, grows wild and tangled, becoming impassable. A section of a dwelling tree, suffering from a blight, is simply abandoned because the subtle art of coaxing the tree's immune system to fight it has been reduced to a half-remembered prayer. The great living libraries, the trees containing the DNA encoded knowledge of their entire civilization, still stand, silent and majestic. But their books are now sealed forever. The biological interface required to read them is a forgotten art. They are surrounded by infinite wisdom, but are functionally illiterate. This catastrophic loss of practical knowledge is not a fantasy. We have a stark and powerful mainstream historical fact from our own past that shows how quickly this can happen. The Romans were, without question, some of the greatest civil engineers in history. Their aqueducts, marvels of design and construction, brought fresh water to sprawling cities and stood as a testament to their mastery of the physical world. And yet, after the Western Roman Empire fell in the 5th century AD, the complex knowledge of how to build and maintain a large-scale aqueduct system simply vanished from much of Europe. For nearly 1,000 years, this vital technology was lost. People lived in the shadow of these colossal, crumbling structures, knowing they were the work of great ancestors, but having no idea how to replicate them. The descendants of the Etherlands now live that reality. They are no longer the masters of their ecosystem. They are just another creature living within it. By the 10th generation, they have moved out of the decaying upper levels of the tree dwellings, which are becoming structurally unsound, and are living in simpler shelters on the forest floor. They are no longer gardeners. They are now hunter-gatherers, foraging for whatever the wild, untended forest provides. Their diet is poorer, their lives harder, their health more precarious, and their technology shows it. The elegant, grown tools of their ancestors are gone. Instead, they learn the old, hard magic of stone, chipping flint and obsidian into crude points and scrapers. We have seen this happen in the archaeological record. The scientific evidence comes from the island of Tasmania, off the coast of Australia. When the seas rose after the last ice age, around 10,000 years ago, the people living there were completely cut off from the mainland. Over the subsequent millennia, their technology, which had once been as complex as their mainland cousins, became simpler. The archaeological record shows that they lost the ability to make bone tools, for example. Some evidence even suggests they may have lost the knowledge of how to make fire, relying instead on carefully preserved embers from natural strikes. This is a chilling example of how isolation and population pressure can lead to a loss of complex skills. And it has led to one of the most difficult discussions in the field, as archaeologists and anthropologists still debate whether the simplification of the Tasmanian toolkit was an adaptation to a new and different environment, or if it represents a genuine case of technological devolution due to prolonged isolation. For the Aetherland descendants, this devolution is their new reality. And in this new reality, something strange begins to happen. They find the remnants of the old world, a shard of impossibly smooth ceramic, a piece of a tool that seems to hum with a faint, residual energy. But they have no idea what it is. It becomes a sacred object, a relic. They perform rituals around it, trying to coax the magic of the old ones to return. As a quirky tidbit, this is a known human phenomenon. During and after World War II, isolated Pacific Islanders who had seen American military forces arrive with vast amounts of cargo, jeeps, radios, canned food, developed what are known as cargo cults. After the soldiers left, the islanders would build mock airstrips and fake radios out of wood and vines, performing military-style drills in the hopes of persuading the magical cargo to return from the heavens. The Ethelyn descendants become the first cargo cultists of their own forgotten world. The stories are all they have left. But the stories are now myths. The precise scientific language of biology is gone, replaced by the poetry of magic. The ancestors didn't grow the trees, the elders now say. They could speak to the spirits of the forest, and the trees would bend to their will. The knowledge of cellular regeneration is transformed into the legend of heroes who could heal any wound with a single touch. The great silent collapse becomes the story of a paradise lost because of a forgotten sin. They sit in the shadows of their own magnificent, incomprehensible ruins, and they tell stories to explain the ghosts that surround them. So while the descendants of the Ethelyns sit in the growing darkness, telling stories about the ghosts that haunt their world, you must become a ghost hunter. But your hunting ground is not a crumbling castle. It is the largest, darkest, most unexplored realm on the face of the planet. It is the 25 million square kilometers of land that was swallowed by the sea. The search for this deep past is not a matter of shovels and brushes. It is a high-tech seance, an attempt to contact a lost world using the most advanced tools of our own civilization. You are not an archaeologist in dusty boots. You are the pilot of a deep-sea drone, your control room bathed in the cold blue glow of a dozen monitors. Your eyes are a robot, drifting silently through a world of crushing pressure and absolute blackness, miles beneath the waves. The primary tools for this hunt are not cameras, at least not at first. The deep ocean is a murky, difficult place to see. Your most powerful sense is sound. You deploy an AUV, an autonomous underwater vehicle, a sleek torpedo-shaped robot that you program to mow the lawn, flying in precise, pre-programmed lines back and forth across a target area of the seabed. This AUV is equipped with the search's most crucial piece of technology, side-scan sonar. This is the scientific evidence that makes the entire search possible. The sonar doesn't take a picture, it paints one. It sends out a wide fan of high-frequency sound pulses to either side of the AUV. As these sound waves hit the ocean floor, they bounce back. A hard, protruding object creates a strong echo, which shows up as a light-colored shape on your screen. The area behind that object, where the sound is blocked, creates an acoustic shadow, which appears as a dark shape. By stitching together thousands of these echoes and shadows, your computer creates a ghostly, photorealistic black and white image of the seafloor. But where do you point this incredible machine? The ocean is vast. A blind search would be like looking for a single lost coin in all the deserts of the world combined. So you become a deep-time geographer first. You use geological models based on ice core data and seismic surveys to reconstruct the lost coastlines of 100,000 BCE. You look for the places where any intelligent beings would have naturally settled. The mouths of ancient rivers, the sheltered bays, the land around freshwater estuaries. You identify these prime locations on your digital map, and that is where you send your AUVS. You are, in essence, searching the drowned downtowns of the Pleistocene. This isn't just a theoretical exercise. This technology has yielded breathtaking results. As a mainstream historical fact, the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project, using these exact techniques, has discovered a shipwreck graveyard in the deep, oxygen-free waters of the Black Sea. They have found over 60 perfectly preserved shipwrecks from the Ottoman and Byzantine eras, some so pristine that you can still see the chisel marks on the timbers and the coils of rope on the deck. Because the deep water lacks oxygen, the wood-eating organisms can't survive. It's an environment of almost perfect preservation. Crucially, they also found evidence of submerged Bronze Age settlements from before the sea flooded to its current level. It's proof of concept. Lost worlds can be found, and they can be found intact. But sometimes, the sonar sends back a picture that is not so clear, a puzzle that defies easy explanation. This is where the hunt becomes an art. As a quirky tidbit, in 2011, a team of oceanographers using sonar in the Baltic Sea discovered a bizarre 200-foot wide circular object on the seafloor. Dubbed the Baltic Sea Anomaly, the sonar image showed what looked like a crashed flying saucer, complete with features resembling ramps, stairs, and long, straight runways. The discovery sparked a media frenzy. Subsequent analysis has all but confirmed that it's a completely natural, if unusual, glacial rock deposit. But the anomaly is a perfect illustration of the central challenge of this work. The ocean floor is full of strange geometric shapes created by geology, and our pattern-seeking human brains are desperate to see intention in them. This very problem has created one of the most significant challenges for this new field of science. Marine geoarchaeologists still debate the most effective criteria for distinguishing between an unusual natural rock formation and a heavily eroded potential man-made structure from sonar data alone. How many right angles does it take to rule out coincidence? How regular does a grid pattern need to be before it screams artificial? There is no easy answer. Every potential site requires a second, more difficult step, sending down a remote-operated vehicle, ROV, with cameras and manipulator arms to see and touch it directly. And that is the moment of truth. You would fly your ROV over hundreds of promising, geometric-looking rock formations. But then, one day, the sonar image would resolve on your screen, and it would be something else entirely. It wouldn't be a neat grid of stone. It would be a sprawling radial pattern on the seafloor that looks less like a city and more like a fossilized root system of a gargantuan, impossible tree. The hunt for the Etherlands would have finally found its first baffling clue. The search in the deep ocean is a hunt for a ghost in a vast, dark cathedral. But now, you must travel to the other great archive, the polar opposite in every sense. You leave the crushing blackness of the abyss for the blinding, featureless white of the Antarctic plateau. You are now at a remote research station, a tiny, fragile island of human warmth in a sea of ice that stretches for 1,000 miles in every direction. The air is so cold it hurts to breathe, and the only sound is the constant, whining howl of the wind. Here, the search goes vertical. You are not looking for a city. You are drilling through time itself, one frozen year at a time. The process is one of the most meticulous and challenging engineering feats ever undertaken. A massive, hollow drill bit, specially designed not to contaminate its sample, slowly grinds its way down into the ice sheet. It is agonizingly slow work. After each short descent, A long, perfect cylinder of ice, an ice core, is pulled up to the surface. Each core is a precious, irreplaceable artifact. It is handled with more care than a museum piece, in labs kept at sub-zero temperatures, because each layer, each bubble trapped within it, is a page from a book that has been sealed for millennia. The primary purpose of this work is to understand our planet's climate history. But for you, the goal is far stranger. You are looking for a single sentence written 100,000 years ago that says, "We were here." The ultimate example of this monumental effort is the mainstream historical fact of the Vostok Station, a Russian research base in the heart of Antarctica. Perched atop the ice that conceals the massive subglacial Lake Vostok, scientists there have been drilling since the 1970s. For decades, they worked their way down, finally piercing through more than 2 miles of solid ice to reach the liquid water of the lake in 2012. It was a journey that took longer than the entire Apollo program, a multi-generational quest into the deep past. The true magic of this science, the core piece of scientific evidence that makes it all worthwhile, lies in the tiniest of details: the air bubbles. When snow falls and is compressed into glacial ice, it traps small pockets of the surrounding atmosphere. As you drill deeper, you are traveling backward in time, and you can extract these bubbles and analyze the air within them. It is a direct, physical sample of Earth's ancient atmosphere. We can measure the exact concentration of carbon dioxide and methane from 100,000 years ago. This is how we know, with certainty, what the greenhouse effect was like during the last ice age. So, while you search for the Aetherlands, you would first be looking for their industrial fingerprint, as the Silurian hypothesis suggests. You'd be looking for a sudden, inexplicable spike in methane or another gas in the layers corresponding to their time, a chemical signature that screams artificial. But the ice holds other, stranger secrets. As a quirky and slightly alarming tidbit, scientists are increasingly concerned about paleoviruses that have been locked in the ice and permafrost for tens of thousands of years. As the world warms and the ice thaws, these ancient microbes are waking up. In 2014, scientists successfully revived a 30,000-year-old virus, a type of giant virus, from a sample of Siberian permafrost. It was still infectious after its long sleep. The ice is not just a record, it's a potential Pandora's box of ancient biology. If the Aetherlands suffered a biological collapse, the very microbes that destroyed them could be waiting down there in suspended animation. This drilling into the unknown is fraught with scientific peril and debate. For years, scientists have argued about whether subglacial lakes like Vostok are truly isolated ecosystems, or if there is some slow interchange of water and life with the wider environment through a network of hidden subglacial rivers. If they are completely isolated, they are unique biological time capsules from millions of years ago. If they are connected, they are part of a vast, hidden plumbing system that we are only just beginning to understand. The answer is critical. A perfectly sealed vault is the best place to find a perfectly preserved, unique sample. Day after day, your drill grinds deeper. 10,000 years. 50,000 years. The layers of ice tell a story of a wildly fluctuating climate. Then you reach the target depth, the ice that formed 100,000 years ago. The cores are brought to the surface, and the initial analysis of the trapped air begins. The carbon dioxide is normal for the period. The methane is stable. There is no industrial signature. The Silurian hypothesis seems to be a dead end, But then, the mass spectrometer flags an anomaly. A trace amount of a complex organic molecule that has no business being in the ancient atmosphere. It is not a product of combustion or any known geological process. It appears to be a complex signaling molecule, a byproduct of a biological process of staggering sophistication. It's not the signature of a civilization that built with fire and steel. It's the faint, airborne chemical ghost of a civilization that built with life itself. The trace of that strange molecule in the ice core is a tantalizing ghost. It's a compelling clue, but it's not proof. It's a whisper that could be misinterpreted, a signal that could be statistical noise. But while your colleagues in Antarctica are carefully archiving their controversial ice, you receive a quiet, encrypted email from a marine archaeology team working in the North Sea. They were investigating one of the sonar anomalies your AUV had flagged, the strange, radial, root-like pattern on the seabed, in the heart of what was once Doggerland. They sent down an ROV, and for days they found nothing but oddly shaped silt formations. But then, tucked into a crevice, the ROV's manipulator arm picked up a small, dark object. And it is this object that changes the world. It doesn't look like much at first. It's a piece of something, about the size of your hand. It's smooth, impossibly so, with a deep, matte black finish that seems to drink the light. Its shape is the most baffling thing. It's a complex, flowing curve that seems to defy any obvious purpose. It's not a shard of a pot. It's not a fragment of a statue. It feels less like a tool and more like a piece of a three-dimensional puzzle made by a being with a different understanding of geometry. The material is a kind of ceramic, but it's lighter than any ceramic you've ever felt, and when you tap it, it makes no sound. And so begins the most painstaking, paranoid, and important scientific investigation in human history. The object is brought to a secure lab, and the process of elimination starts. This is the heart of the scientific method. You don't try to prove what you think it is. You try, with every tool at your disposal, to prove that it's something boring. First, is it modern? A team analyzes its surface under an electron microscope, looking for the microscopic tells of modern manufacturing. They find none. They scrape a tiny sample and run it through a mass spectrometer, searching for the chemical fingerprints of the 21st century. Plasticizers, industrial pollutants, radioactive isotopes from Cold War bomb tests. The sample comes back unnervingly, impossibly clean. Next, is it a known ancient artifact, somehow displaced? Experts on every known culture are brought in. They compare it to Roman pottery, to Chinese porcelain, to pre-Columbian stonework. Everyone says the same thing. They have never seen anything like it. The material, the shape, the finish, it doesn't belong to any known human culture. This meticulous, almost obsessive process of cataloging and comparison is a mainstream historical fact of any great discovery. When Howard Carter opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, he didn't just rush in. He and his team spent the better part of a decade methodically documenting, photographing, and preserving every single one of the 5,398 items within, understanding that context is everything. Now comes the final, greatest hurdle. Is it natural? Could this be some kind of bizarre geological fluke? A uniquely shaped volcanic bomb, ejected from a volcano and smoothed by the sea? A metallic meteorite that entered the atmosphere, shattered, and was encased in a strange concretion on the sea floor. Geologists spend months on this. They analyze its crystalline structure, its elemental composition. They conclude that while it's made of elements found on Earth, they have been combined and fired at temperatures and pressures that defy any known natural process. This is where you deploy the definitive test. The scientific evidence will come from a technique called thermoluminescence dating. It is a beautiful piece of physics. When a ceramic is fired, all the natural background radiation stored in its crystals is released. From that moment on, it begins to absorb radiation again from its environment at a steady, known rate. By heating a tiny sample of the artifact and measuring the burst of light, the thermoluminescence that is released, you can calculate with incredible accuracy the last time that object was fired. The sample is prepared, the test is run, and the date comes back. It is 98,700 years old, plus or minus a few centuries. A single impossible object now sits in a sterile lab, and it has survived every attempt to explain it away. It is provably artificial, and it is provably ancient. It is a hello from a world we never knew existed. And it is a chilling reminder of all the other strange finds that were not so lucky. As a quirky historical tidbit, in 1852, a magazine article reported that a metallic, vase-like object, inlaid with silver, was blasted out of solid rock by miners in Dorchester, Massachusetts. The Dorchester pot became a legend, but the object itself was lost to history, never properly analyzed, leaving it as a forever unproven mystery. This time, the artifact is not lost. It is here. And it has led to the most profound schism in the history of science. Archaeologists now fiercely debate whether a single anomalous find, without any surrounding cultural context, can ever be accepted as proof of a new cultural paradigm, or if it must remain an intriguing but ultimately unprovable mystery. But for most of the world, staring at the high-resolution photos of the impossible black curve, the debate is already over. The mystery is real. You watch as the world outside the laboratory begins to process the impossible. The news of the artifact, authenticated and dated, doesn't just make headlines. It breaks the very concept of news. It is an earthquake in the human soul. Every history book on every shelf in every school and home is now, in an instant, a work of fiction. The neat, comforting story of human progress, the slow, steady climb from stone tools to space travel, is revealed to be a lie. Not a malicious lie, but a lie born of ignorance. A children's story we told ourselves because we couldn't imagine anything grander. The entire, carefully constructed edifice of our past has been demolished by a single, silent, curving piece of black ceramic dredged from the bottom of the sea. The intellectual shockwave is immediate and catastrophic. In the first few weeks, it's a topic of manic excitement. Talk shows host frantic debates between stunned historians and triumphant futurists. Religions scramble to find a place for this new, profound mystery in their cosmologies. But then, as the sheer mind-altering scale of the discovery sinks in, the second stage begins. A fierce, institutional backlash. The academic establishment, which has built its entire reputation on the old story, does not go down without a fight. Emergency conferences are convened. Urgent papers are published. The arguments are desperate and predictable. It's a hoax of unimaginable sophistication. The thermoluminescence dating must be flawed, contaminated by some unknown radiation source. It's a one-off anomaly, a freak of nature we don't yet understand. A single artifact is not proof of a civilization. This is not a new phenomenon. This is the classic immune response of an established paradigm to a foreign body of fact. As a mainstream historical fact, for centuries the intellectual world was certain that the city of Troy, the setting for Homer's epic poem The Iliad, was a complete myth, a poet's fantasy. Then, in the 1870s, a wealthy German amateur named Heinrich Schliemann, who believed the old story was literally true, took a copy of the Iliad as his map, went to Turkey, and started digging. He found Troy. The academic establishment of the day was furious. They called him a treasure hunter, a vandal, a fraud. They couldn't accept that their carefully constructed theories had been toppled by a madman who had simply believed a fairy tale. The Aethelin artifact is Troy, magnified 1,000 times over. The denial becomes a fascinating study in human psychology. As a quirky and poignant tidbit, you might remember the story of Hiroo Onoda, the Japanese soldier who hid in the jungles of the Philippines for 29 years after World War II had ended. He refused to surrender. He saw leaflets dropped from planes announcing the war was over, but he dismissed them as enemy propaganda because they didn't conform to his last orders. He needed his old commanding officer to be flown to the jungle in 1974 to formally relieve him of duty before he would finally lay down his arms. Many in the historical community become like Onoda, trapped in an intellectual jungle, refusing to believe their war is over, that the world they knew is gone. But the scientific evidence against them is not just the artifact itself, but the new model of history it creates. For centuries, our view of the past, like Darwin's original view of evolution, was one of slow, steady gradualism. The new model, a direct parallel to the evolutionary theory of punctuated equilibrium, is one of long periods of stasis or slow development, punctuated by the sudden rise and catastrophic fall of complex systems. Our civilization is not the peak of a long climb. It is just the latest pulse of life, flourishing in the quiet period after the last great extinction. This new, terrifying model of a cyclical past becomes the central battleground. Historians of science still argue whether major scientific breakthroughs are the result of a single eureka moment by a lone genius or the culmination of slower, incremental work by an entire community. The Aethelin artifact is a eureka moment on a species-wide scale, and it forces a complete re-evaluation of our place in time. We are no longer the inheritors of a 5,000-year-old tradition of civilization. We are the survivors of a 100,000-year-old cycle of boom and bust. We are not the first. We might not even be the most advanced. The story of human progress has been proven catastrophically, humbling wrong. The mirror in which we saw ourselves as the pinnacle of creation has been shattered, and in its broken shards, we see for the first time a reflection of a much older, much stranger, and much more profound face. The anger and denial of the old guard eventually fade, not because they are convinced, but because a new generation grows up for whom the artifact is simply a fact. And for you, living in this new world, the feeling is strange. The sun still rises, the seasons still turn, your daily life is much the same, but the background hum of the universe has changed its tune. You look at the grand achievements of our civilization, a cathedral, a particle accelerator, a moon landing, and you still feel pride, but it is now tempered with a new, profound, and unsettling emotion: humility. We are no longer the protagonists of the story of intelligence on Earth. We are the sequel. We are the second act, waking up on a stage where a much grander, more elegant play has already been performed, its actors long since departed. This feeling of demotion, of being violently knocked from the center of the stage, is not entirely new to the human psyche. As a powerful mainstream historical fact, we have been through this once before. For thousands of years, we were absolutely certain that the Earth was the stationary center of the entire universe. The sun, the moon, the planets, the stars, they all revolved around us in perfect celestial spheres. It was a comforting, magnificent thought that placed us at the heart of creation. Then, in the 16th century, Nicolaus Copernicus published his work, and the Earth began to slide. Galileo's telescope confirmed it. We were not the center. We were just the third rock from a rather ordinary star, in a forgotten corner of a vast, indifferent cosmos. The Copernican revolution was more than just an astronomical discovery. It was a psychological cataclysm. It was the first time we were told, in no uncertain terms, you are not as important as you think you are. The discovery of the Etherlands is the second Copernican revolution, but it is not about our place in space. It is about our place in time. There is a modern phenomenon that gives a glimpse into this kind of profound perspective shift. It is the scientific evidence known as the overview effect. It's a cognitive shift reported by many astronauts who have seen the Earth from orbit or the Moon. They describe looking back at our planet, a tiny, fragile blue and white marble suspended in an infinite black void. National borders vanish. The conflicts that seem so important on the ground are revealed to be petty squabbles on a pale blue dot. The effect is often described as a feeling of overwhelming awe, of a deep, sudden connection to the planet as a whole and to all of humanity. It is a feeling of humility, not of insignificance, but of being part of something much larger and more precious than oneself. The Etherland artifact gives the entire human race a kind of temporal overview effect. We can now see our own civilization from a distance, not in space, but across the vast, dark ocean of deep time. And we see that we are just one fragile, beautiful island of light in a much longer, much more mysterious story. Our old linear history feels broken now, but there is a beauty in the breaking. As a quirky and philosophical tidbit, the Japanese have an art form called kintsugi, which means to join with gold. When a treasured piece of pottery is broken, they don't throw it away. They meticulously repair it, using a lacquer mixed with powdered gold, silver, or platinum. The philosophy behind it is that the object is more beautiful for having been broken. The cracks are not something to hide, but a celebrated part of its history. Our history has been shattered, but the Etherland discovery is the gold that fills the cracks. Our story is now infinitely richer, more complex, and more beautiful because we know we are not the first. The long, dark period we used to dismiss as the Stone Age is now revealed to be a profound interregnum, a silent winter between two vibrant summers of intelligence. This discovery has finally, and perhaps irrevocably, settled one of the most anxious questions of the modern age. For decades, philosophers and theologians have argued whether the discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence would be a unifying event for humanity, or would cause catastrophic social collapse due to religious and cultural shock. We have spent a century aiming our radio telescopes at the stars, listening for a message from an alien other. The Etherlands provide the answer, but in a way no one ever expected. We have just made first contact, not with a being from another star, but with a lost branch of our own family. It is a terrestrial first contact with our own planet's deep past, and the effect is not collapse, but a humbling sense of connection. We are not alone, and we never were. The ghost in the machine of life on Earth is us, and it has been here for a very long time. We have lost the arrogance of being the only child, but we have gained the profound, quiet comfort of knowing we have an older, wiser sibling. That newfound humility, that quiet comfort of knowing you have a long-lost sibling, is a beautiful feeling. It lasts for about a year. Then, as the initial shock wears off, and the real implications of the discovery begin to seep into the bedrock of human thought, a second, much colder emotion begins to take its place. The Ethelans are not just a comforting memory. They are a ghost at the feast. Their silence is not a peaceful one. It is a scream, frozen in time, echoing across 100,000 years with a single, terrifying message. It can all go away. Their disappearance is no longer a mystery to be solved. It is a warning to be heeded. If they, with all their ecological wisdom, their biological mastery, their peaceful and harmonious society, could be brought so low that they vanished from the face of the earth, what chance do you have? You look at your own civilization, a chaotic, brawling, industrial machine that is actively poisoning its own cradle, and a cold dread begins to form in the pit of your stomach. We are not the elegant gardeners. We are the clumsy mechanics, tinkering with a planetary engine we don't understand, covered in grease and arguing over the instruction manual. Their fall proves that even the wisest and most careful driver can crash the car. We are driving it blindfolded, with one foot on the accelerator and the other on a landmine. This brings you face to face with a chilling concept from cosmology and futurism: the Great Filter. The theory of the Great Filter is an attempt to answer the Fermi paradox. If the universe is teeming with potential life, why is it so quiet? Why haven't we heard from anyone? The filter is a hypothetical barrier, a challenge or a probability so immense that it prevents life from successfully evolving into a long-lasting, galaxy-spanning civilization. And the Ethelans have just handed you the most terrifying piece of evidence imaginable. For decades, cosmologists and philosophers have argued whether the Great Filter is behind us or ahead of us. If it's behind us, we've already passed it. Maybe the jump from non-life to life is incredibly rare, or the evolution of complex intelligence is a 1 in a trillion shot. In that case, we are the first, and the galaxy is our oyster. But the Ethelan artifact screams that the filter is not behind us. Intelligence has arisen before. It has become advanced before. And it has failed before. The filter, the great test, is still waiting for us up ahead. This is not just a theory. Our own history is filled with smaller-scale filters. As a stark mainstream historical fact, around 1200 BCE, the entire interconnected world of the late Bronze Age collapsed with shocking speed and violence. The great empires of the Hittites, the Mycenaean Greeks, and the Egyptians in the Levant all fell apart in the span of a few generations. Great cities were burned and abandoned, trade routes vanished, and entire writing systems were lost. The Bronze Age collapse was a systems failure, a combination of drought, famine, migration of the mysterious sea peoples, and political instability created a domino effect, a perfect storm that brought a thriving international world to its knees. It was a regional great filter, and it took centuries for civilization to recover. The Ethelans suggest that the same can happen on a planetary scale. And the most terrifying part is that the filter might not be an external threat. but a test that any advanced civilization creates for itself. The scientific evidence for our own self-made filter is updated every year. It is the Doomsday Clock, maintained by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists since 1947. The clock is a metaphor, a symbol of how close humanity is to a global catastrophe of our own making. Midnight is apocalypse. As of the early 21st century, the clock is the closest it has ever been to midnight, closer even than at the height of the Cold War, due to the twin threats of nuclear war and unchecked climate change. The Aetherlands are a data point that suggests that for any civilization, this clock will eventually strike 12. This makes our own attempts to reach for the stars seem touchingly, tragically naive. As a quirky tidbit, in the 1970s, the Pioneer 10 and 11 spacecraft, attaching to each a small gold anodized aluminum plaque. The Pioneer plaque contains a diagram of a man and a woman, the location of our sun relative to nearby pulsars, and other basic information, a message in a bottle thrown into the cosmic ocean. Ever since, scientists have debated whether this was a brilliant gesture of hope or an act of colossal recklessness. Are we wisely advertising our existence? Or are we like children shouting in a dark and unknown forest, drawing the attention of things we cannot possibly comprehend? The story of the Aetherlands reframes that question entirely. The greatest threat may not be a predator in the forest, but our own inability to stop ourselves from burning the forest down. Their ghost looks at our little plaque and whispers, "It is a lovely gesture. But first, you must learn to survive your own Tuesday." The cold dread of the Great Filter Warning hangs over humanity like a shroud. For a time, it inspires a new kind of global cooperation, a shared sense of fragility. But fear is an unstable fuel. It soon gives way to a much more powerful, more familiar, and far more dangerous human emotion: desire. The Aetherlands are no longer just a warning. They are a promise. They are a lost treasure map, and at its center is the ultimate prize, a cure for every ill that plagues our civilization. The race is on, not to mourn the Aetherlands, but to plunder their tomb. Their mastery of biology becomes the new holy grail, the central obsession of our species. The single curving piece of black ceramic is endlessly analyzed, but it offers few clues. The real effort, a global project that dwarfs the Manhattan Project and the Apollo program combined, is focused on reverse engineering their living technology. Could we learn their secrets of regeneration to regrow lost limbs, cure spinal cord injuries, and defeat the slow, grinding decay of aging itself? Could we reactivate our own dormant cellular machinery to fight off cancer as easily as we fight off a common cold? Could we adopt their methods of agriculture, creating perennial food forests that could end world hunger and, in the process, draw down the excess carbon from our choked atmosphere, healing the climate? The allure is irresistible. It is a siren song of salvation, promising a shortcut out of the dead end we have built for ourselves. The problem is that we are trying to read a master's book of poetry by only studying the alphabet. We are desperately trying to extract their technology without understanding the deep, holistic philosophy that guided it. We want the power without the responsibility, the results without the wisdom. We are like children who have found a master surgeon's toolkit and are trying to perform heart surgery by banging on the patient's chest with a scalpel. The initial results are grotesque. Teams of geneticists isolate a fragment of what they believe to be an Aetherland regeneration gene, perhaps from a sample of ancient pollen found with the artifact. They splice it into lab mice. The mice do, in fact, regrow a severed limb, but it grows into a monstrous, cancerous mass. We have learned a single word from their divine language, but by shouting it out of context, we have created a curse. This desperate, clumsy process of reverse engineering a lost, superior technology is not without precedent. As a fascinating mainstream historical fact, the ancient Romans created a form of concrete that was astonishingly durable. Structures like the Pantheon still stand today, and their harbors, built with concrete that could set in salt water, have survived 2,000 years of relentless waves. After Rome fell, the recipe for this hydraulic, self-healing concrete was completely lost for over a millennium. Modern scientists have only recently, through painstaking analysis, rediscovered the secret. The Romans mixed volcanic ash into their mortar. This created a unique chemical reaction with seawater that caused new interlocking crystals to grow within the concrete over time, making it stronger, not weaker, as it aged. It is a perfect example of a lost art, a piece of superior ancient technology that took us centuries to painstakingly relearn. Our search for the Etherland's biological secrets focuses on a tantalizing piece of scientific evidence, the mystery of orphan genes. These are fully functional genes found in the DNA of a specific species that have no known relatives or ancestors in any other lineage. They seem to appear out of thin air, with no evolutionary history. Scientists are still trying to understand how they form. For the researchers of the Etherland project, orphan genes become a primary target. They begin to sequence the DNA of every ancient plant and microbe found in the sediment layers from 100,000 years ago, looking for bizarre, highly advanced orphan genes that could be the fingerprints of their genetic engineering. But the complexity is maddening. The more we learn, the more we realize we don't understand. It's like the quirky tidbit of the legendary Stradivarius violins. For 300 years, no one has been able to perfectly replicate the sublime, resonant sound of the instruments made by Antonio Stradivari in his small Italian workshop. Scientists have analyzed the wood, the density, the shape, the varnish, using electron microscopes and CT scanners. They have proposed theories about the chemical treatment of the wood, or a mini ice age that made the trees grow denser. But the secret remains elusive. We can see and measure every physical property of the violin, but we cannot capture the ghost in the machine, the subtle holistic process that made it perfect. The Etherland's biology is the ultimate Stradivarius, a masterpiece of living art whose genius we can recognize but cannot replicate. And as we stumble forward, our crude attempts to mimic their power ignite the most explosive ethical firestorm in history. The old theoretical discussions are now terrifyingly real. Bioethicists have long argued whether it is morally permissible to use gene editing technologies like CRISPR to create designer babies, or to enhance human capabilities beyond the natural norm. Now, the question is no longer theoretical. The Etherland project dangles the possibility of transcending our flawed human form entirely. Do we have the right to do that? Who gets to decide? The debate rages, threatening to tear our already fragile global society apart. There is a terrible, growing sense that in our desperate attempt to steal fire from these lost gods, we may only succeed in burning our own world down. The same hubris that might have destroyed them is being rekindled with a terrible ferocity in us. The frantic, almost manic search for the Etherland's lost power forces a question that is deeper, more personal, and far more unsettling than any debate over technology. As you watch teams of scientists risk everything to unlock the secrets of a single, silent artifact, you have to ask, who are you in this story? Are you a grave robber, cracking open a pharaoh's tomb to steal its treasures? Or are you a lost child, standing in the ruins of your ancestral home, trying to remember the names of the people who built it? The answer to that question will define the future of your species. It is the great schism of the new age. Are you the descendants of the Aetherlands, or are you their replacements? First, you must confront the colder, cleaner, and perhaps more terrifying possibility. You are the replacements. This is the clean slate hypothesis. It posits that whatever catastrophe befell the Aetherlands, the climate hammer, the fire from the sky, the enemy within, was absolute. It was a biological extinction event. Not a single one of them survived. Their living cities decayed, their DNA libraries rotted, and their genetic line was completely, irrevocably severed. The Earth, for a time, was empty of high intelligence. And then, there was you. In this version of the story, your ancestors, the tough, scrappy, normal Homo sapiens, were simply the beneficiaries of this extinction. You inherited a planet that had been cleansed. Your slow, arduous climb from the Stone Age was entirely your own. You reinvented agriculture. You reinvented writing. You reinvented science, all from scratch. This makes your story one of incredible, lonely resilience. But it also makes the Aetherlands a truly alien civilization. Their biology, their philosophy, their art, it has no direct connection to you. It is a dead star whose light has finally reached you, beautiful and inspiring, but with no living heat. You are a second, entirely separate experiment in intelligence, run by the planet after the first one failed. This idea of one human population completely supplanting another is a grim but powerful mainstream historical fact from our own past. When your ancestors, Homo sapiens, migrated into Europe around 45,000 years ago, the continent was already home to the Neanderthals. For a few thousand years, you shared the landscape. But by 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals were gone. While we now know there was some minor interbreeding, the dominant story is one of replacement. Whether through direct conflict, competition for resources, or the introduction of new diseases, one kind of human vanished and another took its place. The clean slate hypothesis suggests the Aetherlands were your Neanderthals, on a global, civilizational scale. But then, you must turn and face the other possibility, the one that is messier, more intimate, and infinitely more profound. You are the descendants. This is the integration hypothesis. The collapse was not total. Thousands, or perhaps tens of thousands of Aetherlands survived, but they were scattered, traumatized, and stripped of the complex knowledge that underpinned their world. They became refugees, trickling into the wider, more numerous populations of hunter-gatherers that surrounded them. Over generations they were absorbed. Their unique culture was lost, their stories faded into myth, and their refined biology was diluted in the vast ocean of the human gene pool. In this version, you are not a separate experiment. You are a hybrid. You are the mongrel descendants of both the elegant, peaceful gardeners and the tough, resilient survivors. This makes the Aetherland legacy not an alien technology to be reverse-engineered, but a forgotten inheritance sleeping in your own blood. The scientific evidence that underpins all human origin stories is the analysis of mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down only through the maternal line, and the Y chromosome, passed down only from father to son. This research has allowed us to trace all living humans back to a mitochondrial Eve and a Y chromosomal Adam, common ancestors who lived in Africa hundreds of thousands of years ago. This proves our shared origin, but it doesn't preclude later additions to the stream. The Ethelians would not be our ancestors from that deep past, but a later, powerful tributary that flowed into the great river of humanity. Their genes, carrying the dormant potential for their biological mastery, are still with you, fragmented and scattered, but present. This theory offers an explanation for certain bizarre biological mysteries. As a quirky tidbit, scientists have long been fascinated by atavisms, the sudden spontaneous reappearance of an ancestral trait that has been dormant for countless generations. For example, some humans are born with a small vestigial tail, a genetic throwback to our distant primate ancestors. What if some of the most extraordinary human talents, the once-in-a-generation genius of a Mozart, the profound empathy of a saint, the intuitive biological understanding of a master herbalist, are not just random variations, but atavisms? The sudden, fleeting reappearance of a trait inherited from a forgotten, more advanced ancestor. The ghost in your genes, for a moment, waking up. This schism between the two hypotheses plugs directly into the oldest and most fundamental debate about who we are. Sociologists and biologists still argue with great passion whether human behavior is primarily determined by our genetic inheritance, nature, or by our culture and environment, nurture. This nature versus nurture debate is no longer academic. It is the central question of your future. If the clean slate hypothesis is true, then your violent, destructive tendencies are innate. They are your nature, and the Ethelians are just a beautiful, irrelevant dream. But if the integration hypothesis is true, then your nature, your deep genetic inheritance, might actually be one of peace and harmony. It would mean that your violent behavior is a cultural flaw, a learned sickness. It would mean you are not trying to become something new. You are just trying to remember who you've always been. The great debate, the question of whether you are their descendants or their replacements, rages on. It becomes the new, defining philosophical conflict of your age, a question that cannot be answered by a single, silent piece of black ceramic. That artifact was the key that opened a door, but the room it revealed is a hall of 1,000,000 more sealed doors, each one leading to a deeper mystery. The single explosive question of if they existed has been answered, and in its place, 1,000 new questions, quiet and profound, have bloomed like night flowers in the sudden darkness of your historical ignorance. The search has changed. The frantic, almost desperate scramble for proof has been replaced by a more focused, more profound, and infinitely more difficult quest. The question is no longer if, but who. This shift ignites a new golden age of exploration, a global scientific endeavor that makes the space race look like a backyard hobby. Archaeology, paleontology, genetics. These are no longer dusty, underfunded academic pursuits. They are now the most vital and prestigious fields of human endeavor, the front line in the search for your species' soul. You are no longer just digging for artifacts. You are searching for a mind, for a philosophy, for a ghost that you can finally give a name. The first and most urgent question is the most basic. Who were they, physically? The artifact is beautiful, but it is sterile. The real prize now is biological. A bone, a tooth, a strand of hair trapped in ancient amber. Or, the ultimate prize, a body retrieved from the deep, preserving freeze of the Antarctic ice. The goal is to find a source of their DNA, because the scientific evidence that could answer this question is now a reality. The field of paleogenomics has given you the almost magical ability to extract and sequence ancient DNA from the tiniest of fragments. With just a pinch of bone dust, you can reconstruct the entire genome of an individual who has been dead for 50,000 years. You can determine their hair color, their eye color, their genetic relationship to modern humans. You can, in essence, resurrect their biological identity. You are waiting, with the entire world holding its breath, for the day you can finally look the Ethelans in the face, even if it is a face reconstructed from the quiet language of their genes. But a genome cannot tell you what a person believed. As you study the artifact, you realize its strange, flowing, non-utilitarian shape may be the only clue you have to their philosophy. It wasn't designed to do anything in a mechanical sense. Perhaps its purpose was contemplative, a physical manifestation of a mathematical or spiritual principle. This is not unheard of in our own past. As a quirky and fascinating tidbit, consider the Nebra sky disk, a bronze and gold artifact discovered in Germany and dated to the Bronze Age, around 1600 BCE. It is a stunningly beautiful object, inlaid with gold symbols representing the sun, a crescent moon, and a cluster of stars that is almost certainly the Pleiades. It is not just art. It is the oldest known concrete depiction of the cosmos, a sophisticated astronomical calculator used to predict the seasons. It is a perfect fusion of science, art, and religion. It shows that for ancient people, these were not separate categories. Was the Aethelin artifact the same? A tool for thinking, for meditating on the shape of the universe? This is a puzzle that may be impossible to solve, because cognitive archaeologists still debate whether the abstract geometric symbols found in Paleolithic cave art represent a universal human symbolic toolkit, lines, dots, and zigzags that have an innate meaning, or if they were specific, culturally bound signs whose meanings are now forever lost to us. Without the cultural key, the Aethelans' art may remain a beautiful but locked door. And finally, you must ask the most humbling question of all. What did they know? Their mastery of biology implies a depth of scientific understanding that dwarfs your own. What else did they understand? Did they know the true nature of quantum mechanics? Did they understand the origin of the universe, the mystery of dark matter, the secrets of consciousness? This question is haunted by the ghosts of our own lost knowledge. As a mainstream historical fact, the Great Library of Alexandria, in its time, was the single greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world. It is said to have held hundreds of thousands of scrolls containing the collected wisdom of the Greek, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian worlds. When it was destroyed, the loss was incalculable. We lost entire plays by Sophocles, entire histories of the ancient world, entire books of forgotten science and mathematics. We don't even know what we don't know. The Library of Alexandria represents the lost knowledge of just the last few thousand years. Now multiply that loss by a factor of 100. The Aethelans had 100,000 years to watch the stars, to study the planet, to look inward. What they knew, what they discovered, and what was lost with them is a mystery so profound it makes the burning of Alexandria seem like a misfiled library card. The old world had one great mystery. Your new world has 10,000, and the search has only just begun. The discovery of the Aethelans doesn't just rewrite the history of your planet. It redraws your map of the entire universe. For the first time, you look up at the vast, silent tapestry of the night sky, and you see it not as a realm of infinite possibility, but as a colossal, echoing crime scene. For a century, your brightest minds have been haunted by a question so simple and so profound, it has its own name: the Fermi paradox. The paradox is this: the universe is ancient, nearly 14 billion years old. It is filled with hundreds of billions of galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars. The laws of physics and chemistry that allowed life to arise on Earth should be the same everywhere. By all statistical probability, the sky should be blazing with the signals of countless intelligent civilizations. It should be a noisy, crowded, cosmic city. And yet, it is utterly, terrifyingly silent. We have aimed our radio telescopes at the heavens and heard nothing but the cold hiss of empty space. "Where?" the physicist Enrico Fermi famously asked, "is everybody?" The Aethelans whisper a new and chilling answer. Perhaps the sky is silent, not because intelligence is rare, but because endurance is impossible. Perhaps the universe is not an empty city. Perhaps it is a graveyard of failed attempts. The Aethelin artifact is the first tombstone you have managed to read, and the chilling part is that it was in your own backyard. Their story suggests that the Great Filter is not a single, unique hurdle, but a universal law of nature for any complex civilization. You either learn to live in perfect, sustainable harmony with your planet, or you burn out. You either solve the riddle of your own self-destructive tendencies, or you become another silent data point. The Aethelans, for all their wisdom, failed. What does that say about anyone else's chances? This reframes all your own clumsy attempts to join the cosmic conversation. As a hopeful mainstream historical fact, in 1974, humanity sent its first serious message to the stars. Using the giant Arecibo radio telescope, we beamed a simple pictorial message toward a star cluster called M13, some 25,000 light-years away. It was a 3-minute broadcast, a digital postcard containing a diagram of our DNA, a stick figure of a human, and our location in our solar system. It was a beautiful, optimistic gesture, a hopeful hello shouted into the void. But in the light of the Aethelin discovery, that gesture now seems profoundly naive. We were inviting people to a party in a house we had only just discovered was built on a cemetery. The scientific framework for this hope has always been the Drake equation. This is the scientific evidence that underpins the entire search for extraterrestrial intelligence, SETI. It's not a proof, but a probabilistic argument, a string of variables used to estimate the number of detectable civilizations in our galaxy. It includes factors like the rate of star formation, the fraction of those stars with planets, and the fraction of those planets that could develop life. But the final, most crucial, and most unknown variable in the equation is L. The average lifetime of a technological civilization. For decades, we could only guess at L. We used our own civilization's brief lifespan as the only data point. But the Aethelans give you a new, terrible number to plug into the equation. They suggest that L might be tragically short. The equation still produces a universe teeming with life, but it becomes a universe of fireflies, civilizations that blink into existence for a few brilliant millennia and then wink out, forever trapped on their home worlds, never having the time to cross the interstellar void. This makes the few strange whispers we have heard from the cosmos all the more poignant. As a quirky and famous tidbit, in 1977, an astronomer using a radio telescope picked up a powerful narrow-band radio signal coming from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. The signal was so strong and so unusual that the astronomer, Jerry Amon, circled it on the computer printout and wrote one word: "Wow!" The wow signal lasted for 72 seconds and was never ever heard again. It is the most famous, most compelling, and most frustrating potential alien signal in history. Was it a stray transmission from a long-dead civilization, finally reaching us after a journey of 1,000 years? Was it a beacon from a civilization that is now just dust and memory? The existence of the Etherlands fundamentally reshapes the central debate in this field. For decades, astrobiologists have argued whether the conditions that allow for the evolution of complex life are so uniquely fine-tuned that Earth is essentially a cosmic miracle, the rare Earth hypothesis, or if the universe is filled with life-bearing planets and we simply haven't looked long enough, the principle of mediocrity. The Etherlands destroy that simple dichotomy. They suggest that Earth is not rare, that intelligence might blossom all the time, but they also suggest that its survival is so improbable that the sky remains silent anyway. The universe might be a jungle full of beautiful, short-lived flowers that bloom and die in a single season. The silence of the sky is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of ghosts. You have stopped searching for aliens and have begun a new, more somber science, cosmic archaeology. And you realize, with a profound and humbling chill, that the first alien ruin you ever discovered was human. You have spent so long looking for their legacy. You have plumbed the depths of the ocean and drilled through the heart of the polar ice. You have searched the hidden code of your own DNA and listened to the faint, distorted echoes in your oldest myths. You have even cast your gaze outward, reinterpreting the great, silent emptiness of the cosmos as a testament to their likely failure. But in all this frantic searching, in all this looking out there for a sign, you have missed the most profound, most obvious and most unsettling possibility of all. What if the Etherland's greatest legacy is not an object to be found? What if it is the very ground beneath your feet, the very air you are breathing, the very shape of the life that surrounds you? What if you have been living inside the artifact all along? This is the final, grand paradigm shift in your understanding. You are no longer an archaeologist searching for a lost civilization. You are a visitor in a garden that has been left untended for 100,000 years. A garden so vast and so old that you have mistaken it for a wilderness. The natural world that you have spent your entire history trying to understand, to tame, and to conquer may not be natural at all. It may be a post-natural world, a landscape that was subtly, artfully, and profoundly shaped by a guiding intelligence, and you are just a weed that has sprung up in the cracks of the flagstones. How could they have done this? Not through brute force, not by carving mountains or moving rivers. They would have worked as they always did, silently, biologically, patiently. They would have been the ultimate genetic gardeners. Think of the mainstream historical fact of the domestication of the dog. Over a mere 15,000 years, your ancestors took a wild, formidable predator, the grey wolf, and through a process of selective breeding, they reshaped it. They altered its body, its face, its temperament. They even rewired its brain, giving it the unique ability to understand human social cues, to read your expressions, to follow your pointed finger. You took a wolf, and you made a friend. It is the most profound act of interspecies bioengineering in your known history. Now, take that simple, clumsy process of artificial selection and give it to the heartlands. Give them 100,000 years, and give them the power to write and edit the code of life directly. What could they have done? Perhaps they saved species that were on the brink of a natural extinction, subtly tweaking their genomes to help them adapt to a changing climate. Perhaps they promoted certain traits in the animal kingdom that they found beautiful. The iridescent shimmer of a butterfly's wing, the complex melody of a songbird. Perhaps that forest you walk through, which you think is a random assemblage of trees, is actually a carefully balanced, designed ecosystem, its species chosen and placed to create a harmony that you can feel but cannot explain. Your entire world could be their unseen art project. The scientific evidence for this kind of deep, genetic conversation between species is all around you, in a phenomenon called horizontal gene transfer, HGT. You are used to thinking of genetics as a vertical process. Parents pass their genes down to their children. But we now know that life is far more creative and promiscuous than that. Bacteria can swap useful genes between completely unrelated species, like they're trading cards. Viruses can pick up a piece of DNA from one organism and accidentally insert it into another. We have even found plant genes that have somehow jumped into the DNA of insects. The web of life is not a tidy, branching tree. It is a tangled, interconnected web, and the heartlands would have been its master weavers. They could have introduced genes for resilience, for beauty, for symbiosis into the planetary ecosystem, and by now, those genes would look entirely natural. This leads you to look at the stranger corners of the biological world with a new and suspicious eye. As a quirky and fascinating tidbit, consider the ginkgo biloba tree. It is a true living fossil, a species so ancient and unique that it has no close living relatives. It is the last survivor of an entire order of plants that vanished from the fossil record millions of years ago. It is also incredibly, almost unnaturally, resilient. It is resistant to pests, to disease, to pollution. A handful of ginkgo trees were among the only living things to survive the atomic blast at Hiroshima, sprouting new leaves from their charred trunks while the city around them was ash. Is the ginkgo tree a miracle of natural survival, or is it the last lonely sentinel of an ancient orchard, a piece of perfected living technology that was designed to endure anything? You thought the platypus was weird before. Now you have to wonder if it was an heartland joke. This idea that the world you inhabit is a designed ecosystem plugs directly into a very modern and very heated debate. Conservation biologists still argue fiercely whether rewilding, the process of reintroducing keystone species like wolves or beavers to ecosystems where they have been extinct for centuries, is a vital tool for ecological restoration or a reckless act of playing God with a complex system we don't fully understand. The heartlands force you to ask a much deeper question. What is the wild you are trying to restore? What if the baseline, the natural state you are aiming for, was actually the end state of their grandest project? You are not restoring a wilderness. You might just be a clumsy groundskeeper trying to tidy up a forgotten god's garden. And so you stand, in your mind's eye, in the middle of this ancient, forgotten garden. The world is suddenly re-enchanted, filled with a deep, quiet intelligence that you had never before perceived. Every strange and beautiful creature, every resilient and ancient tree, is now a potential clue, a living whisper from a past that is not truly past. But as you stand there, bathed in the glow of this grand, beautiful, and terrifying idea, the cold light of the present day begins to filter back in. You have to remember the truth. The single curving piece of black ceramic is still sitting in its sterile laboratory case. The strange molecule in the ice core is still just a controversial data point. The radial pattern on the seafloor is still just a sonar image. After all this time, all this searching, you have no definitive proof. The ghosts remain ghosts. But now, finally, you understand the difference. You understand the vast, crucial distinction between no evidence and evidence not yet found. To say there is no evidence for the Etherlands is to claim that you have looked everywhere and found nothing. But you have not looked everywhere. You have barely looked anywhere. Humanity has explored in detail less than 5% of the Earth's oceans. The deep ice of Antarctica and Greenland remains almost entirely untouched. You are like a person standing in the doorway of a lightless warehouse the size of a continent, a warehouse filled with 1 billion shelves, and after shining a penlight on the first 2 boxes, you declare with absolute certainty there is no key in here. The arrogance of that conclusion is staggering. The truth is that our picture of our own known history is still being radically redrawn by new technologies. As a stunning mainstream historical fact, for decades we believed the ancient Maya civilization consisted of a few relatively isolated city-states, surrounded by vast, sparsely populated jungle. Then, in the last few years, scientists flew planes over the Guatemalan lowlands, armed with LIDAR. This is the scientific evidence that has revolutionized archaeology. LIDAR stands for light detection and ranging. It fires millions of laser pulses down through the dense jungle canopy. While most pulses are reflected by the leaves, a few make it to the forest floor and bounce back, allowing a computer to digitally erase the entire jungle, revealing the precise topography of the ground hidden beneath. And what it revealed was a jaw-dropping, world-altering surprise. Under the jungle was a sprawling, interconnected megalopolis, home to millions of people, with raised highways, complex irrigation systems, and defensive fortifications. We had been flying and walking over the ruins of one of the ancient world's largest civilizations for a century, and had never even seen it. Now ask yourself, if we can miss tens of thousands of stone buildings hidden under a few feet of leaves, how easy would it be to miss a civilization that built with living wood, whose cities have long since turned back into soil hidden under 1,000 feet of water? The deep places of our world are still capable of producing mysteries so profound they shake our assumptions. As a quirky and famous tidbit, in 1997, a network of underwater microphones, originally set up by the US Navy to detect Soviet submarines, picked up a bizarre and incredibly powerful sound from a remote point in the Pacific Ocean. Dubbed the bloop, it was an ultra-low frequency sound that was detected by sensors over 3,000 miles apart. It didn't match the signature of any known man-made or geological event, and for years it fueled wild speculation about a colossal, undiscovered sea creature, a real-life leviathan lurking in the abyss. The mystery was eventually solved. Scientists are now confident the sound was the noise of a massive ice quake, the fracturing and cracking of an Antarctic glacier. But for a time, the bloop was a genuine monster from the deep, a sound from a world we do not know. It is a perfect metaphor for the search for the Etherlands. The silence we hear from the deep past might just be the limit of our hearing. This leads to a fascinating and parallel discussion in another field. SETI astronomers still debate the lurker hypothesis. The idea that an advanced alien civilization could have placed a probe within our own solar system millions of years ago, perhaps on the moon or in the asteroid belt, and it is simply sitting there, watching us silently. The hypothesis suggests we simply haven't developed the right methods or looked in the right specific places to find it. We are searching for radio signals from distant stars when the evidence might be in our own attic. The story of the Etherlands is the ultimate lurker hypothesis, played out on our own world. The evidence may be all around us, or in a single specific, difficult-to-reach place. And we are just now, finally, beginning to learn how to look. This entire journey, this thought experiment, is not a demand for you to believe. It is a call to curiosity. It is an invitation to remain open to the profound, paradigm-shattering possibility that the greatest discoveries about what it means to be human are not waiting for us in the future, but are sleeping, silently, in the deep, forgotten darkness of our own past. And so, you find yourself back in the quiet of your own time. The grand living cities of the Etherlands dissolve like a dream upon waking. The hum of their lost biology fades, replaced by the familiar silence of your own room. After this long journey into the deep past, you are left with no definitive proof, no final answer, only a single, silent piece of black ceramic sitting in an imaginary museum. You must now ask the final, most important question. What was the point? If the Etherlands remain a ghost, a beautiful but unproven hypothesis, what have you gained by chasing them? The answer is simple, and it is everything. Whether or not the Etherlands were real, the act of imagining them is one of the most powerful things a mind can do. It is a tool, a lens, a thinking machine for recalibrating your entire perspective on what it means to be alive. The journey was never about proving they existed. It was about breaking free from the prison of the present moment. We live our lives in a state of what you might call temporal myopia. Our vision of time extending only a few generations into the past and, if we're feeling ambitious, a few decades into the future. The Etherlands are the cure for this myopia. They force you to grapple with the dizzying, terrifying, and ultimately liberating concept of deep time. This is the mainstream historical fact that underpins all of modern geology. In the late 18th century, a Scottish geologist named James Hutton stood at a place called Siccar Point and realized that the layers of rock he was looking at must have taken millions, not thousands of years to form. It was a discovery that shattered the human-centric timescale of the world and revealed a past of almost unimaginable vastness. The Etherlands are a story that allows you to feel that vastness in your bones. To truly grasp this scale, you can use a piece of scientific evidence popularized by the astronomer Carl Sagan, the cosmic calendar. If you compress the entire 13.8 billion year history of the universe into a single calendar year, the Big Bang is the first second of January 1st. Our Milky Way galaxy doesn't form until May. Our solar system appears in early September. The first life on Earth arises later that month. The dinosaurs appear on Christmas Eve and are wiped out on the 29th of December. And humanity, your entire known, recorded history, from ancient Egypt to the present day, takes place in the last 14 seconds of New Year's Eve. The Etherlands, in this calendar, would have lived out their entire long civilization sometime around 11:58 p.m. Your entire life is a fraction of the final second of the cosmic year. This perspective is so difficult to maintain that some have tried to build monuments to it. As a quirky and profound tidbit, A group called the Long Now Foundation is currently building a monumental clock inside a mountain in Texas. It is called the Clock of the Long Now. It is designed to tick once a year, its century hand will advance once every 100 years, and the cuckoo will come out on the millennium. It is a clock designed to keep accurate time for the next 10,000 years. A piece of art and engineering meant to encourage our civilization to think beyond the next election cycle or quarterly report. It is a modern, mechanical attempt to build the kind of long-term perspective that the Aethelans, in their living, breathing world, would have simply taken for granted. Ultimately, the story of the Aethelans forces you to decide what kind of stories are useful. Psychologists and historians still argue whether a society's belief in a mythical golden age is a source of inspiration and cultural cohesion, or a form of nostalgic paralysis that prevents future progress. Are the Aethelans a goal to strive for, a reminder of a wisdom we have lost and must regain? Or are they a beautiful trap, a fantasy that makes our own messy, imperfect world seem unbearable by comparison? The answer, perhaps, is that they are a tool, and like any tool, their value is in how you use them. The dream of this deeper past is not an escape from the present. It is a way of seeing the present with new eyes. It reminds you that our moment in the sun is a fragile and precious gift. It suggests that our choices, our actions, our legacy might echo for far longer than we can imagine. It fills the world with a sense of profound, undiscovered mystery. It makes the silence of the past feel less like an emptiness and more like a listening. And now, as this long story comes to its final, quiet close, you can feel the grand cosmic scale of it all begin to soften and recede. The immense pressure of those 100,000 years begins to lift, leaving behind not a sense of anxiety, but a quiet and settled wonder. The images of living cities and drowned worlds fade like gentle watercolor in the rain, their details blurring, their sharp edges dissolving into the soft darkness of your room. These great, unsettling questions about time and existence are not meant to be burdens for you to carry into your sleep. They are simply stones, picked up on a long walk, that you can now gently place down beside you. Feel the weight of them leaving your mind. The story is over. All that remains is the gentle, rhythmic pattern of your own breathing. A simple, quiet, and ancient reassurance that you are here, now, in this moment. The past is a deep and silent ocean, but you are safe on the shore, and the tide of sleep is slowly, calmly beginning to pull you away into a peaceful, dreamless rest.